pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic that stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
All right, thank you, everybody. Oh, look, we've got our owl 3 going.
Roll call, please. Director Pat,
Here.
Director Burgess,
Here.
Director Canoe,
Here.
Director Yasi,
Here.
and for the record, Director Barker is absent.
Okay, all right. This is the part of the meeting where they have public comment on agendas that are not on the, comments not on the agenda. So the public comment period is for 3 minutes for the public to address the board and the matters of interest within the jurisdiction of the district and that are not listed on the agenda. These are not agenda item discussion. So you have 3 minutes and, you got our first tender. Okay.
Just want to make sure we keep pushing through on all the items that I keep coming back on. I know tonight you're gonna have a closed session meeting later. Want to make sure everybody gets a copy of what I wrote and reads it, understands it, and try to finally get through. It's something I really want to just try to push past. And then in addition, I still am trying to work towards getting the will serve for the Dalton RV project, which I think we're getting closer on, but any assistance the board could have that might help move that along quicker, you know. Well, this would be like 3 months since I brought this stuff to you guys, so, you know, we're still kicking it around, so I'm not getting any younger, and I appreciate you guys, doing what you can to move staff and get it done.
Thank you. Is there anybody else before I hand it over to the department?
I want to thank the water treatment operators for fixing that leak out here at the old gas pumps. I brought it to Christian's attention Valentine's Day. He gave it to Mike. Mike ordered the part. Then last week we got it fixed. It wasn't a drip. I had several calls. Everybody drove by and said, hey, every drip counts. Well, that wasn't a drip. Nevertheless, it's fixed, and I want to give Mike a big thank you, and Christian, and the young lad who tried to fix it the first time was Brian. I flagged him down the road. I said, can you do me a favor? Sure. He went and got his 5 wrench, cranked down in that thing and said, hey, you're gonna break it, it's brass. So he done the best he could, and he was one of them that helped fix the leak, but it's fixed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
All yours.
Apologize being late, traffic was longer than I thought. Okay, so we have consent items. Is there any public comment on the consent items? Are there any consent items board members like to pull for discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to pull the office manager's report, so that, engineer's report, and G, and operations manager report H.
Do I have a motion to approve?
Also, we also.
Yeah, tell me what you want to do, E also? Okay, can I have a motion to approve consent agenda items A, B, C, and D?
I'll make that motion for A, B, C, and D under the item.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Scott?
Is there a specific question you have, or do you want Kristen to just, Kristen?
Oh, one off, I was going to the office.
Yes, yes.
I just wanted to have that, the moment, to make sure that everybody was aware of and see if there's any comment or future discussion on the numbers that, the numbers of disconnects and rates and things like that. So that was very useful information that you pulled on the historical versus the current. Maybe you guys could just make the board aware of those numbers and see if there's any discussion about that.
You mean the ones that, the averages over time?
Yeah, it looks like you have a little bit of an uptick. that, see if there may be nothing that needs to be done about it, but it seemed like it was something to be aware of.
Yeah, so what he's talking about is, on this report, we have how many bills were processed, and then how many late penalties were assessed, disconnect letters, notice to disconnect letters, how many logouts there was, that type of a thing. It's usually pretty consistent over time, to be honest. Kristen kind of even guessed what those numbers were before we ran that report for you. Even through COVID, that was from 2018 through COVID, the current, so there was still not much of a fluctuation. It's usually the same people, more or less, I guess,
Same offender.
if you will. Yeah. You know, we could put that information on this report if that'd be helpful to the board, maybe, and.
I'm not sure there's anything that we need to necessarily attend to a lot, but I looked at those numbers and it looked like it was 264 current month or recent month, and then 224 was the average. So we're like 40 up, which is, you know, almost 30%, something like that.
Yeah.
So that seemed like a pretty significant uptick, and that didn't surprise me just because of inflation and things like that.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was something for us to be aware of in case there's anything to be done about it.
There was also a period in there within the 5 years that, we weren't charging late fees, we weren't, because of COVID. We weren't locking off, that kind of thing, and then we also, a new law went into effect. SB 998, I believe, where we could not lock off until they were delinquent 60 days, so that kind of changed things a little too.
Yeah, one thing, did we sign up for that program for the low
The low income.
income thing? You wanna tell us about that a little bit, or do you want me to?
There's nothing really,
Right.
yeah, nothing really,
Well, I got some emails today, actually, I didn't tell her yet, but, so there's a program that you could sign up for as, ratepayer to, if you're low income and you qualify for certain things through the state, I believe.
Yes.
To get some or all of your water and sewer utilities paid for directly to the CSD, or to the city agency. There is a one-time charge just to set it up, but that's for individual customers to do themselves. But as an agency that is the purveyor, you have to actually register with the state to do the program too. So we just finished that, Kristen did all that work, I just got an email this morning about it.
So we're registered.
We're registered, so people can go apply through the system, and maybe when we're done and all ready to go, we'll post some stuff on our website to talk about how to do people links to that program.
Yep.
It used to be just for arrearages that you were late on, and now they just changed the law, I think this month or recently, to be even going forward if you qualify for the low income provisions. Not just that you're late stuff, so it's going forward too, which I think is a very good.
That's great. This is exactly what I was going. It's like, is there anything that we want to do to assist those who are having a difficult time, especially with the current economic, situation? So it sounds like that's a great option. Is that something that we can send out to those folks in the next bill or something?
Yeah, we'll put together some notices somehow. I mean, we don't even have to have a full notice. It can just be a little line just on your bill or something like that. We'll also post it on our website and send it on our email list and whatnot.
And just so you know, you mentioned helping, I go above and beyond, I mean, before we lock off, because obviously I don't want to deal with it either, as much as they don't want to deal with it, and then, it takes a lot of time for the guys to go out, and what happens, the majority of the time is we lock off, and 20 minutes later, we get a call and we're unlocking them, so it's a lot of time on our part, and it's extra money for the customer. So, they get extra notice with the 48-hour notice. That's not a legal requirement. We just do that as a courtesy. It helps us obviously with the numbers as well. When we get to lock off day, I have about 30 customers on the list. So if you noticed last month, we only locked 5 meters. So of those 30 that on that list, I personally phone call these people to give them a last chance. Hey, it was due by 10 a.m. Can you make a payment? if they say I can't make a payment, I make arrangements. But half the time, they don't answer the phone, or they just don't pay. I mean, it just, it is what it is at that point. But yeah, I get it down to 500.
That's awesome.
And then some of them actually don't pick up the phone if they know our number, and I get lots of payments during this time while I'm making those phone calls.
Right, yeah.
So we do, I mean, I give arrangements all the time.
Yeah,
People
that's
call
great.
in, hey, I need help, that's great. We do
Yeah.
contracts, we do, hey, I can't pay until next week, that's really just an arrangement. So, we do
That's awesome.
try to help them
I
out.
appreciate that you've gone up above and beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, that's one, yeah, thank you.
Kind of a follow-up question from before, on locking off meters that, meter supplies the fire sprinkler system of the house. Have we looked into or researched the legality of us being able to do that?
Yeah.
The fire safety system,
So as long as it's for a residential structure, yes.
you can lock it off?
Yeah, because all the other commercial and bigger facilities have a separate fire plan for that. Part of it. Yeah.
sorry, it's something I think it's for the office. Could you explain to everybody how the new L3 work that we can broadcast somewhere? Is it going into a file? I was, it's an L3.
So it is just being recorded right now, and then it'll save, a file to the computer, and then we will upload it.
Are you watching it right now? So when I speak, I come up, I stop speaking it.
But it also shows the entire
Yeah, but I mean, it.
At the same
probably puts- There should be about, like, the top picture and the bottom picture has all the people on it.
room. I'll show you what I see,
There we go, that's what I want.
but I'm not gonna keep it up, because it is a little distracting. Oh, we're not good.
Yeah, extract, yes.
Don't bother, stop your big city.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking we could extend the board meeting just to be a movie night. Seniors will bring coffee.
Wait, actually,
Once you're doing that, you guys
it's fun.
want to, just go through EFG.
Can I ask a question
And
before we-
all one time and then come back for a motion.
That's fine, can I just, before we close the office, one?
Yeah.
Can I, last thought is just, besides that one program that we signed up for, are there other things that we're aware of that other districts have done to assist that our customers who are having a hard time, like I mean, I don't know, like a community fund or anything along those lines that might help other.
None that I know of. Some people have said that, I think maybe Cambria has some kind of a program and they use PG&E's, low income requirement or something to figure out how they, in order for somebody to qualify, they have to prove that PG&E let them do it. But then you're subsidizing those rates that, if we were to do that, discount people's rates for that reason, they would, other ratepayers would be subsidizing the loss of that revenue. So unless you can supplement it with something else, like from the general fund or something that, we don't really get a lot of revenue for general fund. So that's kind of the problem. Like,
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm curious on both sides, you have to be careful with our revenue, but then at the same time, are there any ways that we can, be offering assistance, so just servicing those.
yeah, no, that's a good question. The general fund people always struggle with who gets the money, right? Like, does it go to parks, fire, what roads, or where does that go? They're always fighting over, and then you'd have that other element to kind of figure out how you're gonna split the pie up.
Right,
Thank you.
I'm just gonna talk, saying, here's how it works then, and if you start talking that way, I think it goes up to 5 people. If you start talking.
Well, that's great, thanks for bringing that up, so see how it works.
Yeah,
Appreciate that,
yeah, so once I start talking, and if Dylan talks, they'll put him on, correct? Fine. They're talking. Yeah, I don't know.
Now, Kristen, do you know, is that resolution just because we're far away and it's not super high or we use the
So,
focus mechanism?
I'm actually still looking into that, actually, because the top is actually not too
Right.
bad.
But that one's very zoomed out, so that could just be the resolution.
Yes, but I looked into it, and it could just be a software thing, maybe we need to update something. I
We
still
get
have
some filters that make us all look a little
Yeah.
down here.
Yes,
Please, come on.
It originally said it had to warm up for an hour or so, but it's probably been on for already,
So
so.
from my understanding, you can have 5 different speakers speaking at the same time, and get 5 pictures on the bottom.
Yeah, it's
Which
pretty
is awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool. So from now on, we're gonna be recording it, and do we stick them on our YouTube channel or something like that?
We haven't gotten that far, but
Okay.
yes, that's
Awesome.
probably where we're gonna do that.
Perfect.
And then hopefully we'll just have a link on our, board meeting page that has the video.
Great.
And we'll just put this on if a board member, is going to be attending remotely for one of the acceptable reasons.
Correct.
Okay.
Or if we have a presentation, we will.
A presentation from somebody outside the district, for example. Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you.
yes, thank you.
You have one more question? Keith? No, that was.
Oh, yeah, no,
Okay, next item is the manager's report. Did you have any specific questions or? Us?
No, I just wanted to just, have Scott go with the manager report with us.
Sure. I'll paraphrase, we just talked about the first one there, about setting this owl up. I did meet with, SLO County regarding the transfer of the remaining Oswego water to council. We talked about the timing of the draft agreement to transfer that water to us. We're targeting the board meeting for us next month to have your board approve the draft. And then the county mentioned that they would target the, May meeting at their board to have their board approve the final document. And what that would mean is that then the entire 1,100 acre feet that the county set aside for Heritage Ranch would be under contract with the district and the county. So that's good news, in my opinion.
It kind
It just kind of cuts out.
That's apropos to CJ's thing, right? Because,
Yeah,
right, we're waiting to get total control of that before we can give a will serve for that. Is that-
yes, well, we could still, your board can still get a will serve, it's fine, but he's waiting for us to wait for the county. So he's been dealing with the county, and the county said they're working on this agreement for like a year, probably, to 2 years to transfer all this. Yeah, I guess that's right, because it
So we're in the
expired.
final stages.
Yeah, we're in the final stages. They said May, I'll be really surprised if they get it to their board May, but. We'll keep on.
But as soon,
We'll do everything.
as soon as they do, then there's a draft that gets approved by us and then we're good. We have control.
Our intention is to have bring a draft to you the next meeting that you can approve in advance of the board of supervisors meeting. Then if they approve it as is, they can execute it then. You would already have approved it if you'd done. If they want additional changes, we'd have to bring it back to you for approval. But if they approve what we give them, then we'd be ready to execute.
Okay. So how could we, I'm sorry.
No,
How could we give a will serve prior to that? I thought that was specifically allocated to the property that in question, but we could will serve prior to that?
well, there is a lot of questions, right, that, CJ brought up about the water allocation part of it. So part of your purview as the board, you can make those determinations prior to that agreement being finalized, especially with this small project. It's not like we're talking about a big 200 lot subdivision that we're gonna have to bring water for. It's a very small development that he's working on, but should be minimal water use. And it shouldn't be a problem with your board doing that. And we'll try to write that into the agreement that we'll talk about later in the closed session.
Okay.
With transferring the water and getting all that stuff done in that development agreement. This
Great. So I have one question, it's a very simple one, but 6 stages of this question. But the 1,100 acre feet, so we don't get our 211 yet. Do we pay for that? Do we pay for all of it?
No,
And now, once we sign this agreement, they agreed with them, we start paying for the extra 211.
Correct.
That's all.
That's one of the questions I asked. There is a cost to accepting this water.
yeah, very small, $27 an acre. So, which in comparison, if you look at the National Water Project, their participants are paying for an acre foot of water, is pretty high.
Which is how much?
Like, well, I don't know, yeah, $1,100. If we were to have to utilize that as an emergency water supply, it'd be like $1,100 to $1,200 an acre. Because you're paying for that whole like infrastructure down to the Camp Roberts tank that's required to get it. Yeah, very cheap water, but you know, we've got to treat it still, so.
If we're not using it, can we sell it?
Very good question, and I just brought that up when we met with, the county to keep their ears open. I haven't had time to delve into that, but with all the drought, you know, considerations, especially for people who use groundwater, it could be, and I'll work with council on vetting that out.
As long as we'll pull that water back, but if we don't have it developed and no one's using it and we have it and we're going $27 to
Yeah,
$2,000, that's a.
so the county, I don't know if we're getting off topic, it's kind of related to this, so no, but the county is working on a program to be able to sell their turnback pool water. That's what they call it, the turnback pool, the water they don't use of their entitlement. And how they can do that legally with water code and all that other stuff. So we could leapfrog on that part of it and, you know, put it in that pipeline and make somebody pay for that water.
And so do we sell for 27 or we get the 1200?
Well, we could do whatever your board wants.
Right, but I mean,
Yeah,
is-
No,
It would be also just going to the pipeline and you're paying for the infrastructure of the pipeline. So then that means if we sell our water, we can sell it for $1,100-$1,200.
or whatever they're working on in their resale program, we can just add our water into that. It'd be a lot of legal agreements that would have to happen before that, but it is a possibility. I mean, especially like you said, now until that development comes, we theoretically have 211 acre feet plus whatever else water we aren't actually even using.
We're only at
Because
700.
we have 889 acre feet, but we may only pull out 600 acre feet. So there could be some numbers of turnback pool water that we could participate in.
Who would you think that the customers for this, are people that have groundwater that are under, don't have sufficient amount during drought time?
Yeah, downstream rent, ag people, a lot of
Okay,
agricultural lands are using it, not mail water.
and how would we get that to them?
They would have to figure out how to get it.
So they'd have to truck it over or something like that?
Well, it'd go in the National pipeline that goes down to Paso, and then they'd have to either take another, turnout to take it to their vineyard or wherever they want to use it, or some other infrastructure program. I mean, trucking it, if it's an acre feet, is probably not too really feasible, but I guess, you know.
Well, that's an awesome idea, it seems to me, like that seems like a really good potential revenue for the district, given what, you know, rates we get this water at, and how many people in the county are needed. And, you know, that could cover this, it could cover some of these other projects that we wanna do.
Okay,
Without impacting our own community.
Just see what, 1,100 acre feet, and we only have started, we use 600.
Yeah, that's a
It's a
lot.
lot of
That's a
money
lot
that
of,
they
that's
can
a lot
pay,
of money.
that could offset a lot of work.
Could probably pay for our whole wastewater. contract.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love
well,
it.
that's where, that's where the part of it, we'll have to figure out what you're allowed to use the revenue for, but,
I mean, I gotta believe improvements is in that, right? What else, what better use of that money than improving this?
Yeah.
Probably expenses.
well, I'll keep it on my radar, and that's good, I was planning on it, but it's good to hear, I would hope, I mean, this whole thing about getting all the water was kind of, we've been talking about it for 2 years, even longer. And I know your board was supportive of it then, so it's good to hear that you're supportive of that now, plus that additional.
And I think we should even go for like some packaged water, we'll put it in little bottles, unfiltered, and you can grow stuff in it.
But the squeaky wheel got the drink. You know,
One thing we'll have to look at on an option before we get too far down the road of that idea is, I don't have the agreement sitting in front of me, but I believe there are some restrictions on use of the water within the boundaries of the community services district itself.
Yeah.
so there may very well be a limitation.
Oh, that any sale would have to be within our
It would have
boundaries?
to be within our boundaries, yeah, I believe that's correct, I don't have it sitting in front of me, but
And that would be according to what, to who?
to our contract
With the county, so there's, okay, well, let's figure that out and then we'll figure out how to amend it.
Yeah, and it also has to do with, land uses that are approved for it to be used for. You couldn't.
You can't just give it to any, every use.
Right, but those are all things they're probably working through with their retail or their rental program anyways, except for that, their district boundary is the whole county.
Right.
So they're probably allowed to use that water within their district boundary, which is the whole county, so that's a different thing. We'll have to work through that.
Dr. Barr, do we take public comments at this point?
Yeah, so CJ's right at 10.
Yes, I understand that there's 1,100 total acre feet that were dedicated to heritage range. And then there's 211 that haven't been given out, which is the stuff I've been talking about. And then there's the stuff you're not using above and beyond what you need. But I believe the water's earmarked inside heritage range boundaries. And then, but my question would be, if you do a turn back, whatever you call that program, is that a program where you put it to another use, but then when you need it, you can take it back, or is that how does that work?
I would think so, I mean, it'd be contractual.
I think every year we get a new allotment, so it's what you're gonna use in that year, and if you don't use
No,
it.
just, if somebody's developing and then they want that water, and you put it in a turn back program, does it come back to the person?
It's an annual thing, yes.
Right, I think
Typically,
I've got it.
and I'm aware, but not.
I just wanted to understand the.
Yeah, theirs is a little easier to keep track of because they have the participants on the Nelsonville pipeline that make requests to the county flood control district who manages that pipeline. They say, I want this many acre feet for this year. They do the math equation, they say, oh, there's gonna be 500 acre feet left over, who wants it? Now, so that's kind of, every year they do that.
Gonna be kind of a hard sell if someone getting water right now.
Yeah.
Unless you can make it.
Okay, you're good on that? I'll go. Yeah,
I just haven't finished this.
yeah, let me just keep going through this report really quick, sorry, the time consideration. So Congressman Panetta's office, I think I mentioned solicited, request for community funding, community project funding through his office. Carvajal's office did that previously, but now that they did the redistricting, it's now Panetta. So previously we submitted for some design phase costs for the work project to be grant funded. So this year I did the same thing, but submitted through Panetta's office this last week. It was due the 15th. I submitted it on the 14th actually. Along with some support letters from Supervisor Fishon and Supervisor Gibson, Homeowners Association, and Perryville Seniors. So hopefully they'll take more kindly to us and get it from money this year. Does have to be used within the fiscal year 24 though, so we'd have to use it before, June 30th of next year, which,
About projects she'd like to.
yeah, I forget how many each, persons allowed to submit. I think it's 15 or 20 projects. Last year, King Maria got some money, they got $300,000, I think, for something, so. Well, they got it on paper, they haven't gotten the money physically, I heard, but.
Check on that.
Yeah. So hopefully that goes well. Solid waste, let me mention that San Miguel Garbage Company notified me that they'll need a rate increase due to the consumer price index increases, inflation in other words. And he estimated it, actually showed me that from the CPI website is 7.4% for the 2022 year. He's preparing a formal request and will submit that to me, and then we'll review it and then come back to your board at a future meeting. Probably next month, actually, in April. That's what I said, in April. And then, speaking of the reservoir, it changed so much in the last couple of weeks, but, they ramped back down. In the end, today, I think the 4,000 acres or 4,000 CFS. They did ramp up to 8,000 CFS, and we're releasing it over the spillway through the Overmeyer Gate, as well as the high level outlet work, so I had some pictures that I went down there and took when it was 6,000 acres, for 6,000 to be done. I did get down there when it was 8,000.
I think I have that.
We got some we can share with you or post one on our website if people are interested. I don't know if people in the community go down and realize that they're racing over the spillway, which is not very often. I don't know in your time here how often that happened, but I think I've only heard of it the second time in like 15 years.
Yeah, same,
Right?
the second time I've seen it, I went down through the drive, it's beautiful, yeah.
You don't have something to say, actually.
Yeah, it came out, was really neat,
Yeah,
very powerful,
It's
standing over there, you feel that,
you get wet actually down, if you walk on, go down to our intake and go down the south side of the river, you get closer, you can actually feel the mist.
Is that right?
As you're at Niagara Falls.
Any damage to the wells at all?
We don't know yet, I don't think so, the NGU, it's in the ops report, if you want, can I switch over to the ops report right now?
Sure.
Since my time here?
Yeah.
Okay. So, he mentioned it down here in one of his bullet items, that, the high flows were, causing fluctuations in the water quality, meaning the NTUs, which is the clarity of the water based on the visibility of suspended solids. But the NTUs are still kind of low for such high flows, I think, at 35 to 45 in the river. And then by the time our treatment process is done, it's down to 0.03, which is really that our permit requirements are 0.3. So we're getting, way less than that.
And the color of the water, just as it goes over the spillway, is like strikingly different than out of the lower.
Yeah,
Amazing.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
so I say those are still,
What's that?
Is it more particulate in the bottom water, just what settles out?
Just, it looked like it to me, but,
yeah,
yeah, and I was, like, the turbidity wise, I mean, and it churns up stuff in the bed itself, but as it's going over the spillway, yeah, it looked really a lot clearer than the river normally is.
yeah, I said those NTUs are still kind of low from this severe of a storm event. I think when we had that gully washer of the 9 or 13 inches in that 2 days in January of 21, I think. The NTUs were like in the 300 or 400. Because
That's all the fires, right?
it all came at once. No, that was way after the fire, but I think the lake was just so low and then it just had a little big inrush. And still kind of, churned up all the bottom organic material that was on the bottom. So, anyway, I think that's still doing a good job there.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to mention here is the, EPA is required to, list some unregulated contaminants every 5 years that, may start to be monitored by public water systems. They're talking about PFAS now. I don't know if you guys have heard that term. Polyfluoral something or other. I should have spelled it out in this thing so I could tell you what it actually meant. But it's basically 5, I believe it's 5 contaminants lumped together. They're forever chemicals, basically like Teflon and fire retardant material and things like that, that you can't see that don't go away ever. So,
Never decompose.
never decompose. So they're starting to test public water systems to see the extent of it. We had to participate because we fell into one of the categories that required it. They actually sent us the sample bottles and instructions and paid for all that. Sampling ourselves, it was one sample basically at the Clearwell tank after our treatment process. And then we just had to take the sample and mail it into their lab that they paid for the analysis for. We did that last week. And then we'll wait to hear. I think they're gonna keep continuing a series of samples throughout this calendar year, so we'll keep reporting to your board on how that comes. I don't even know if we're gonna know the outcome of our sample results. I'm guessing we will.
That's what I was gonna ask,
I'll
I
read
hope
it
we can
tomorrow.
see them, if not, can we push to see what those
Yeah.
are, and are we gonna report those to our, constituents too?
Yeah, we can, and it's not, so they haven't even determined what the NCLs are, the maximum contaminant levels of this are. But they did release a statement this week about the draft of where they're landing right now. It's kind of in draft form, it's not in required or law yet, but they do have what those numbers are.
Okay.
But I printed that, I need to do more research, and it just came this week, but.
They're very low.
Yeah, like 0.03 or something, Part per million?
4 parts per trillion.
oh, trillion, yeah.
It's an extremely low.
What's the?
The maximum contamination limit levels of petroleum.
So this is essentially a precursor, this is kind of them studying the quantity of these new things. And then with the expectation that we're gonna probably get some kind of a ruling down the road, they're like, oh, your water needs to be under this level. And so they haven't put that out yet, but we can kind of see it coming.
That's the direction it's headed.
Yeah, they're asking for public comment on this from agencies and things at this point. I didn't see a schedule of when they planned on implementing it, in the little notice that I saw, but we'll keep tracking it and report back to your board on that. They also did provide some, best available technology to treat it. Which one of them is granular activated carbon. So I think we talked about that before, the, unintended good consequence of us doing the gas
Right.
thing, project potentially, will be this, if we have it in our system.
Additional contaminants that we may have to remove from the system. Can you email me what those 5 are?
Sure, yeah. I'll even email you that notice if you'd like.
Yeah.
So if they're gonna come up with this standard, will there be eventually funding for projects from the government?
Yeah, probably we always do these unfunded mandates and then let you kind of scramble, but in this case, at least they paid for the sampling so far. Kind of like the lead and copper pipe, service line replacement thing that they're gonna require here in a couple of years. Where the agencies, I think, are gonna be required to replace customer service lines if they're lead or copper. Meaning from the meter to the house, which is the customer's responsibility, but they're gonna try to put that onto the agencies to get this done somehow. We'll see how that funding comes out of that.
Do we know
Potentially, I guess.
where do these chemicals come from?
Well, fire retardant come from.
So maybe.
Yeah, I don't know, do you know, Phyllis? I didn't know that Teflon.
Teflon and fire are 2 of the big sources of it. It's a big problem at pretty much every airport all over the country because they has a fire retardant.
Well, and all the stuff that's been dumped in woods over the last several
Yeah,
years.
and where they die
Wash
air
drain,
jobs.
they-
That's,
We're probably gonna get gold star for the highest rating of these. buildings.
And then you ought to, don't. It'll go into the groundwater and it may filter out through the groundwater, the contamination may be less. Because we're just taking surface water. So.
Right.
Yeah, but they don't ever go, that's what we'll see, I guess, in the sampling program, that it'll be interesting for sure. And we'll track the funding if there is anything. One other thing I was gonna add is related to this, I was gonna wait till next month, but the DDP, sampling, the, results are kind of, I think I reported the last meeting or meeting before on how those results are sampled and reported with the long locational running annual average. So once you have a higher reading and you're kind of stuck with that over time. But what we asked the Division of Drinking Water if we could do is to sample monthly instead of quarterly. And not have it, be going against our permit basically, because we would have to say we don't want these samples to count toward our compliance. But sometimes they're better because we're continuing to make adjustments. So they're letting us do monthly sampling that we're then gonna average together for the quarter to be in a quarter result. Which could help or it could not help. But from the results I've been seeing, it could help. We've been in the 60s the last couple of months. The third sample will be taken actually yesterday. So we'll see what those are. What we could do too as part of the spirit of what we're talking about on the CDP issue is maybe we provide some of those results here more on a monthly basis of what those each month is as a running total. I mean, we can go on and on with pages, but maybe we'll cut it off within some recent time frame, whatever you're comfortable with. So you can see the individual result.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That'd be super,
Does that
I
make
mean,
Yeah.
What's in it, it's interesting to me, I'm not sure about the rest of the board, but it's, I mean, we're constantly trying to do things to improve the quality of our water. And the challenge is figuring out which things work and which things don't. So it seems like the increased frequency of sampling is gonna help us get there. The other thing that, you know, I discovered when I did our tour is that it seems like there's the possibility of us getting our own testing equipment, which would allow us even quicker feedback. And, you know, then we can try these experiments, see what gets us the most bang for the buck, and know without having to wait a month, even, you know, what's effective, shorten that, feedback loop.
Right, yeah, I'm directing staff too to put a rush on the samples every time. It's a little bit more to do it, but I think it's worth it to, you're back in, you know, 7 days instead of 15 days or more. Sometimes it takes that long, especially if we're sampling every month, because you wanna know what you're doing operationally is having an effect or not. And so by waiting for 20 days to figure that out, it's kind of unreasonable to make that change. So we're doing that.
Is there something, Scott, that we can do that would test, you know, not just the DEPs at the end, but just the organics? So we know if we have a higher organic level going in, before we even do the treatment, we could just straight test the organics. Maybe, I mean, we know that they have the small chlorine, you just do a couple drops in. We're not looking for that really precise number, just something that the engineer can work with and just say, hey, we'll go over, scoop it up, put a couple drops in, yeah, our organics has gone down by 20%, you know, something that we're not gonna use official records, but something that we could just have a color green chart, yellow, blue, you know, a simple type of testing that we could see on the beginning part, the organics, that's our main one. We could, now you could probably see, you know, we're working with less organics coming in, we know what, we're gonna have less reaction with the chlorine coming on the other end for the byproducts.
Yeah, we do test coming in for TOCs, for organics. I'm not sure if there's an instrument that analyzes it and instantaneously that's cheaper. What Director Yaffe is talking about is they have inline TOC analyzers that you can put at your treatment plant that shows real-time TOC. Doug can chime in, but he went on a tour of the SLO plant, San Luis Obispo City, that has one that, where they got a new one, and they're gonna surplus their old one, and so Doug put the interest on it, first on the interest list to get that
Do we have any clue?
old
Would that
one,
be
if we
like,
can, or buy a new one, but they're expensive, right?
Right,
what's the?
$30,000 or
We'll take two.
somewhere around.
To buy it,
Yeah, and then it's about that much every year.
Now, that's a new one?
Well, so I'm trying to, Mike remembers better than I am on this thing, but they have the TOC analyzer, but they had the other that would actually do, was it DVPs that it would do? Something that they're gonna get, but that's the really expensive one to maintain.
Well, I mean, as Director Pop said, like, the UPPs, you know, that's obviously what will ultimately help to account for. But if we just know that we've lowered organics, we automatically know we've lowered. So to me, it's just that testing earlier in the stage that if we can get that at a reasonable price.
Yeah, we have that, it's a different criteria, but it's somewhat analogous and it's UVA, UVT. So we have an analyzer that we currently use, so we can look at it shines ultraviolet light through it and it tells you how much was absorbed or transmitted and you know, the more that's absorbed between point A and point B, then that's the more organics that you have in your water. So there is a
So it's
correlation.
not real time, but we have the ability to run that test anytime we want.
Yeah, that one is, it's not like sampling all the time, but our guys do it and we have that analyzer. That's been here for a few years, right? I wasn't here, it was already here when I was here. But then they have one that is, the city of SLO has one that is always sampling it. So it would be like connected to the SCADA system and then you would just always have that information. Now we grab samples, but it's just UVA, UVT. And
So
then
one of those things was we're very new, but
that's I believe that's the TOC analyzer. I can get back to you on which it is. It's like the cost of it is, you know, 30,000, but then actually it has to be calibrated every year and it's another $20,000 or $30,000 or something like that, yeah, but I didn't write down the information, but when they get one available, is that they're going with the higher end one. and the one that they have will just be to surplus, and so I said, well, we'll take it if you have it.
Yeah, we're trying to balance like the sampling and the cost for that versus it doing any good. And if we just sample, you know, by the time we sample, because we sample TOCs the same time we sample for the DEP. So we know what's coming in, we know what the TOCs are in the clear well tank, which is right after the filters and before it goes to customers. We sample that location for all TOC and DEP. So we can see, well, is there already formulation of DEPs in the clear well tank before it even goes out for another 3 days into the system? Or how is that working? So you can usually tell if you get some number in the clear well tank, you're probably not gonna need it when it's time to get out into the system. So your clear well tank is like the focus point. Seeing how much organic we remove from the treatment process. So we'll kind of see if we can balance that, maybe sample POCs every week or something, if that would be helpful, talk to the operator. If that would help them do any adjustments, or if it's a month or not. And we'll keep looking, I wrote down to look at if there's any other instant TOC analyzer, I don't know. pH would be nice to use, so get that TOC analyzer in your.
Yeah, so simple. All right, thank you, Scott.
Okay, you're welcome. That's all I was gonna talk about.
One question on the, comment about lift station 1 and 5, rehabilitation design phase. I'm not on the construction, committee anymore, but when that comes up, I'd appreciate it if that discussion would be brought forward to full boards, to get a whole idea what you're, we're trying to close that.
Okay, you're on the district engineer report? No, so I'll pass it over to Doug and you guys, I'm sorry.
Well, we are.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I appreciate you, giving me a call report.
I'll just skim over everything and then let you know if you want to talk more in depth. In terms of operations support, I've been working with Mike and his staff about the PRV replacement project. That is a later item, so we'll talk more about that. Specifically about the DVP compliance. We received the piping manifold and we've received the GAC vessels and we've done the electrical upgrades. We're just waiting on the pump and there's been a delay in that. But I found out yesterday that it's available, and so I'm actually picking it up tomorrow in the Bay Area. And bringing it, so we'll have it on site on Monday. And then we have to do our piping connections, things like that, though. It takes some time to get the hoses fabricated and everything, but we're very close to being able to run up to 200 gallons a minute through the 2 vessels. They got here, it was a nervous time, but they got here, coming down the road, to the plant, the delivery driver was a little concerned, but we made it.
How big are these vessels?
They're about 4 feet diameter and about 9 feet tall, but they're like a gigantic water heater, basically, is what they kind of look like. I should put pictures in them. I took pictures because I wanted to prove that they got here on everything. And then the manifold, we had fabricated, we got quotes from the vessel folks to fabricate a manifold that they recommend we use, and it was plastic and it was gonna be like thousands of dollars, and so we had our own fabrication made for less money, and it's all out of stainless, and so we can utilize it for future, if and when this becomes something that we wanna do permanently, then we can just take it from the testing phase to application permanently. It looks really nice. They did a really good job on that. And the tank's vertical or horizontal?
They're
vertical, so, and, yeah, part of the process to be vertical, or is that just? Yeah, cause it actually, the water comes up through the bottom. And it's full of granular activated carbon, basically charcoal. And it's almost got a little, for the lack of better, it's like a sprinkler system inside. It's basically the tube comes up and it's got perforated pipe, coming out at all angles from the center pipe. So it goes up and then it, goes through the carbon and then back out. It goes top to bottom, but we, cause it's gravity, but we need our gravity in our system, we were concerned when I ran the numbers, it would have been, because there's some head loss through those vessels. So I was concerned that we might not be able to get the water through, that's why we put the pump in place and the pump will actually be able to be used in other applications at the plant too. So we're trying to, even though this is just a pilot study on that, we're trying to basically not have anything that's just wasted and thrown away at the end. Like the pump will reuse, the manifold we could reuse, and then the vessels themselves are just rentals. And that actually, in talking to the vendor, depending on how much we find out we need in terms of, you know, how often we need to replenish them, it might be worthwhile to just rent them because you don't have to buy the vessel up front and the labor involved in getting the carbon out of them to reactivate it and then put it back into your vessel. They can just take the whole vessel out and swap it with new ones. I mean, our road is not fun, but I don't know how to drive it, so.
Doug, how are we gonna figure out, I mean, assuming that my understanding is that if we had to recharge these things all the time, it could be quite costly.
Correct.
So the goal is to utilize these as a portion of our strategy for getting our water to where it needs to be. But obviously not necessarily overuse it, because then we would incur a lot more expense than we need to, right? So how are we gonna know where that crossover point is?
And that's why we're doing the study itself, so we will, like I said, we can run up to 200 gallons a minute through these vessels, and using actually the technology we're talking about, the UVA, UVT is gonna be like our first. We'll sample for TOC and we can do DBPs, but at that point, it's not chlorinated, so we won't have DBPs, hopefully. But we can sample for TOC upstream and downstream. It'd be, so we're gonna take the water after our existing filters, and then it'll go through the GAC. So we're gonna sample our TOC after the filters, and then our TOC after the GAC. And then we'll know how much reduction we're getting. But we'll only do that, we're not gonna do that with every sample, but we'll get a good idea of kind of a baseline in our reduction using the UVA, UVT analyzer, so we can just get quick readings, and then I'm gonna have them pull samples regularly. And once you start to see a drop off in that reduction, then that's what they call breakthrough. There's two things that could happen. You'll see a reduction or a drop off in the reduction of the TOC. So that's showing that the carbon is becoming deactivated, but you could also see an increase in the head losses through it, which you can backwash these. So that would be what that is if it's getting clogged with some type of like a sediment. But we don't foresee that being the problem. It's more gonna be that the carbon gets spent. And so it's kind of a curve. You'll see that your reduction will drop off, and then we'll know, okay, we put this many gallons through this many pounds of carbon before we needed to replenish it, and we got this result. And then, you know, because it will be doing this for, the idea is, we think it'll last for 6 months based on what the vendors have told us based on our water. So after that 6 months, we can analyze what the cost benefit was. And then let's say we were able to get into compliance by just doing the 200, then it's a matter of, okay, is that what the board would like to do, or do we want to treat it further and or have permanent or whatever? And we could give you the, you know, the approximate cost associated with each level of further treatment. Because, you know, depending on what our water, we're so dependent on what the water is coming in. And if it's a percentage, if our TOC is here and we're reducing it a percentage, but then let's say another time of year, our TOC is at a different point and we're reducing it a percentage, we want to make sure we stay in compliance.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's how much TOCs we have, it directly correlates to how much DBPs
Right.
end up with. Is that a mathematical thing? Do we know, like, oh, we did a 20% reduction in our TOCs, so we expect to be good, or we're gonna be pretty close. That, like, so that as they change over time, we know how much to use or not use. Yeah,
Right, yeah, and the idea being, you know, ideally it would be that we had monitoring, you know, upstream of our system And then we know in our SCADA that we can adjust and then, oh, we're running, we can, you know, if we had more vessels at our disposal, that we could run more water through the GAC. Or if, let's say this becomes, you know, a problem cost wise and it's just not feasible cost wise, well, then it's like, we're still looking at other options too, like the additional vertical intake, because we do see a reduction in that. Or a combination of, hey, we're gonna run the plant more hours per day, and we're gonna draw more from the vertical intake or intakes, and we're gonna run a higher percentage of the flow through GAC. You know, rather than like, if we do 200 and we're running 800 total, 800 gallons a minute, and 200 is going through the GAC, well, that's a quarter of our flow. But if we drop our flow to 400 and we're running 200 through GAC, we just have to run longer. If we can keep up with demand, then we could, you know, possibly see that reduction. It's just a trial and error, but there is some math involved too, but it's all approximation depending on the
No,
water.
presumably this vendor works with all kinds of organizations like ours, right? And they help size these things accordingly. So what we got was in part due to recommendations that they made based on what we thought we needed.
Correct, yeah.
Did they have any advice or insight? Did they like, oh, we think you run this at a quarter of your flow for, you know, full time or half time or something, and we think that's gonna get you there. Did they give us any kind of insight about that?
Yes and no, I mean, that because our water is so variant in its, you know, depending on the time of year and the rainfall and all that, yeah, they have their salespeople, right? So they'll tell you some numbers. I'm waiting until we actually prove the numbers, but, they say, you know, you can reduce up to 85%, which would be great for us. You know, that would make us compliant.
And that would be 6 months, they're saying, based on our TOCs.
Right.
They gave us enough vessel size for 6 months. So at that 6 months, what does it cost us right now for those vessels?
It's $1,100 a month to rent them, and then it's $10,000. I believe, I don't have it in front of me. I think it's $10,000 to recharge for each reload of the carbon.
Which we think is maybe every 6 months at the rate.
That's what we're guessing right now. I'm hoping that 200 gallons a minute gets us well into compliance and it lasts 6 months. And then, cause that's a no-brainer then from a cost.
So we're at
standpoint.
2,500 a month essentially at that, the 10,000
Yeah.
6 months plus a grand a month.
Right, yeah, so it's 2,500, yeah, so you're looking at like, you know, $300,000 a year maybe is what you're talking cost wise, is that right? Or $30,000 a year. Yeah, it's about $30,000 a year, which, I mean, I don't wanna speak for you guys, but I think that would be
That seems
great.
Pretty inexpensive.
That's what we're hoping.
Get compliant.
Yeah,
great, awesome.
but that's why we're doing the test.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah. Then SCADA, we received our new servers yesterday from Dell. Our, SCADA consultant picked up one this morning, and so he'll be, doing his work on that, and then we'll just it's 100% redundancy on the servers, so he's gonna get one set, and then we'll do the other, and then we're well on our way to completion on that project.
And these servers just sit in a closet in our plant?
Yeah, they're rack mounted servers.
Yep. And is the environment down there pretty conducive to those kinds of things? And
Yeah, we've got all the switch gear and everything already in there.
conditioning and things like
Yeah,
that?
it's air conditioned. But we've got all our, in that one room, when you're going towards the chemicals on the left.
Yeah.
We've got all a bunch of electrical equipment in there, and it's conditioned for that. And if it's not, like if our consultant feels that it's not gonna work, then he'll let us know, but he said as far as he sees, everything's fine there. They're on the last filter, the operators are on the last filter, renovation, last of the 4. They've emptied the filter and it's ready to be, sandblasted, and then they'll put it all back together and put the new media in, and then all 4 will have new media. Then SCADA collection system, that's coming after the water, between water SCADA and collection system SCADA will be doing a telemetry survey, and we have the equipment ready for that too. So we'll be able to move from, we've already been approved for the whole thing, so we'll be able to, once the water SCADA is done, we'll move to the telemetry. Then we'll know what we need to add on the ranch to be able to talk everywhere. And then it's, from there, it's figuring out what we wanna say in terms of when we're talking, what constituents we wanna send, temperature or chlorine residual or whatever, it's all, everything comes with cost, but that's, we can, depending on operations, what we wanna know, we can, we'll be set then to be able to monitor the system. And then Director Barker, you had a question on lift station 1 and 5. I just wanted to be part of the discussion on what the rehabilitation is. I've got quite a bit of experience on doing this, so just curious what materials are gonna be, how it's gonna be applied. No, I welcome that. It's it's 1 through 5, and 2 and 3 are first priority. The biggest, just upfront spoiler alert, the biggest challenge is gonna be the bypass pumping. And how we handle that, but we're looking at, I would like, and it all comes down to cost too, but I would like to ideally in conjunction with the wastewater project, look at, optimization of new pumps in there, but of course, or at a minimum, we'll be relining the well wells and replacing the piping and valving that are in the well wells. We experienced at the Santa Barbara County Jail when they did that, and it was very impressive what they did.
Was it San Con or?
I don't remember the name of it,
Just like
spray on the
sprayed on?
They got in and sprayed it.
Yeah.
They got done with it, it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's good stuff. There's a lot of different things they can do, but I know it's just gonna come down to bypass. It's gonna be the biggest challenge, but the technology of what we can do to fix it, it's gonna be, that'll be pretty straightforward. Just wrapping up, I'm waiting for it to not rain so much, because when you do a smoke test, and you got water in the ground itself, it doesn't work as well. You wanna be able to see your fissures in the ground where your pipe might be experiencing INI. Also, you can have water in people's drain lines that they might be attached to sewer, and that water could have a trap in it and we don't see it, but if we wait for dry weather, that trap might have evaporated. That's right.
And then the work project, I've got a report on that, later. Lastly, the Snug Harbor Sea Base project, the drawings that they've submitted look good, that we just need to show an easement on there is the last thing we're doing, and then Scott and council are working on the draft agreement for the approval of that.
But one question to clarify the cost, was $1,100 each cylinder or $1,100?
No, it's 11 for both.
Oh, for both, and then $10,000 for each one, or $10,000 for both?
Don't hold me to it, but how I remember it was both.
Both were $10,000 to replace both of them, not 10,000 each.
Correct, yeah, like we paid upfront for what we have now. And that was the first month and the carbon, and I think it was in the range of $11,000 to $12,000. But if you divide that over 6 months, then it's, it's roughly $2,000 a month.
Yeah, $31,500 a year.
Yeah. If that's adequate, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Good, Jim?
Doug, I just saw that email before I walked in today. I might request, because nobody told me about that,
Okay,
and that takes some time.
right,
So I would ask the board or whoever legal, if we can just make that a condition or get the will serve. But before I get water or whatever, I gotta provide the easement, because I gotta get a permit.
right,
So
Yeah,
if
no,
we can
I'll-
make that a condition as opposed to something I need to do before I get the will serve. It could be a condition of
we'll talk.
ranking, I don't know how it would work, you're legal, but, much like we talked about, last week or whatever it was, if we find a better way, or if we, I'm gonna work with you guys to try to make the process go well, so, I don't wanna wait on an easement now
Right,
to So if you guys can figure out how to draft something into the agreement, that says, you know, before I'll actually get service, I have to provide that as opposed to I have to provide that to get a will serve, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, and it would be an easement from the owners association, so if you know anybody on that board.
They're notoriously difficult to work with.
I say yes to everything.
Yeah. That's it for my report, and I know.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, revenue's the soul of it.
Bring it forward, keep it. Right, right,
Want to ask for any public comment on those last items, and then you still need to make a motion for those four.
Any public comment? Can I get a motion for?
EFGA.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Business item?
So we are on.
All right, 5A, you probably should follow with the agenda. I should have put a fly sheet in your binder if you're looking at that. But the next item is 5A, and then 5B also has no staff report, it's the verbal discussion. So the first one is 5A about the discussion and direction to manager on desired content and format of the manager report. So I didn't prepare anything, but these are the forms that I've been my form, I'll just give you some background or.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I came on board 6 years ago, I used the existing manager report format for a while, and then I got to know the boards, way they work and what they like to hear or comment on, so I morphed it over time. Used to be really a lot of writing, especially all of it work, all three of them, or two of them at the time off, and manager, so I just tried to be more of a breadth of things with bullet points of all these other things that aren't normal operations, because you don't want to hear that we, went and turned valves or read meters or sent bills or any of that. I wouldn't think, but if you do, that's fine too, we can do that. So that's how I got to these bullet points of what I felt the board was interested in, so if it's changing, well, let me know.
Well, I don't know that I'm more happy to
Do it, or verbal, is good,
I'd love to
is that
speak
right?
to that. I mean, I think this came up at Director Caps's urging, just that we regularly review where we're at with regard to our water quality. That was my recollection. So I'm satisfied with the report in general. I think it's concise, it covers the important points, and maybe the only adjustment would be a standing item of just, where we're at with regard to meeting our requirements. I think that was good.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I don't see a big need for a change. I don't know what everybody else thinks.
Yeah, I don't have much need for change here, except for just that, if there are anything that's happening with water quality, that's something that's very important to me, and I think to the community that any letters going out, any failings, any areas where we're lacking, or even getting close to those numbers. If we have some, we're right on the edge. I know we were on the edge of, some of the other DEPs for a while back in the days, and we've run right to the edge of those numbers. Those would be ones that I would like to hear about. If we're getting close to something, then, we would like to keep things in the green zone, not running right into that yellow area. So that's the only thing that I would like to add. I think your manager report, I really enjoyed your report today. Thank you for all the details that you gave me, and I don't see anything wrong with it at all. The only one thing I'd like to add is the water quality levels. We get close to any of those MCLs that we get on top of before we have a problem.
Okay.
I think, going and testing every month now, maybe talk to the quarterly reports. I think so, I've always liked writing, so. But I think we may find out that those numbers may go down. We're able to average those over the 3 months of the quarter.
Yeah, I wanna make it easy for you as a board and for the public both. And for the sake of time, you know, the reports are, they're very important because that's what we do as our bread and butter. We can take them off the consent or whatever, but, I don't intend to, if we want to discuss things more, maybe we can pull something onto a regular agenda item if you see something too, if we get to that point. But I want to make it easy for you to just take a quick snapshot of where we are, and maybe we don't have as much discussion needed at meetings, but get to the important items, if that's helpful. I have a few examples that I pulled from other agencies, actually. Some just do a verbal general manager report, and then they have their other departments do a written little bullet, kind of like what we've been doing. Like for other agencies who have fire, parks and rec, you know, things like that, they'll have the finance report and things. Also, but the manager report was, in that one agency was just a verbal. The other hand, I have another agency I saw that it looked like the general manager report was all inclusive of all these reports. Like 10 pages long, it was kind of long.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But it had like graphs and how much water did you produce from what well, and you know, how much wastewater did you do, this, that, and the other. So I'll try to stick, do you mind if I try to put something a little different, like if I put a table that has the water quality results of some sort, and we'll just kind of experiment
Yeah,
out there,
sure.
that.
I mean, why don't you do what, I mean, my opinion would be, we're pretty in agreement that the general format is great. You wanna add a couple of charts and graphs? You know, I can't imagine if it doesn't get super long, that's gonna be objective, anybody can object to that, sounds interesting.
Okay.
And we can just keep giving feedback, like, that chart was horrible, why'd you put that in? And then you'll know, like, don't do it, you know? And, but my only other request is instead of circular bullets, can we do little hearts?
You don't like the arrows?
Or stickers.
We use those arrows on the document.
Going pretty fast on board.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna mention that, that could be helpful too, so we don't have to progress a whole month's worth of stuff at meetings, you'll have that.
Very much appreciate the interim summary by email.
They still get all rolled up in the management report
Right.
eventually at the meetings, but if it's happening.
It's great, it lets, for me, it lets me take stuff in between instead of trying to inhale it all like before the meeting.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Any comment on the discussion of, added business item on the agenda? Seeing none? It's just a receive and talk, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Item 8, oral information reports.
No, sorry, we're still on business item, B.
Dean.
Oh, I'm gonna do the whole list. Okay,
And item B is a receiver report from district council regarding director, manager, staff communications. I think,
That's,
John?
yeah, that's me, and I think that's, actually, that discussion we were just having is a good sort of parlay, into this, and, this is something that came up at the last meeting, and the board had asked me to just give a brief talk about this, and, pulling back, this won't be long, and I promise I'm not gonna try to turn into a law professor here, but I just wanted to pull back and give some general, information, which I'm sure you're probably already aware of, the structure of the district, the function of it, how it functions, under the, law that creates it, and also just some practical and, legal reasons for the recommendations that we give as legal counsel for various districts around the county about, the communication between the board, to the staff, and to the general manager. The reason I say it's a good parlay is what we're talking about here, and I think Director Yaffe just raised a good point. It's a lot for the elected members of the board who, right, are here once a month to bring in this, a lot of information, process that, decide what to do with it. And that's how, by the reason that we have the organizational structure that we do at the district, the board of directors, you all sitting together, right, are the elected officials, and you act in 3 different ways. One is at board meetings where you act collectively. 2 is through committees, where board members are designated, certain committees are created and board members are designated to sit on those committees. And 3, an individual director may be designated by the board to take on some particular staff, some particular task. If you look at that organizational chart, then you have that, the board acting in those 3 ways, and then below that, you have 4 different groups that work directly for the board. Namely myself, district council, general manager, operations manager, and the district engineer. We all report directly to the board, sitting as a whole. We take our direction from the board, either sitting as a whole or through those designated committees or other things. And then below that, all the staff, works for the general manager. And the reason that that is set up is, part of what we were just talking about. You all, act as a board in certain limited capacities at certain limited times. The general manager is the general manager all the time, and so he's able to give direction to the staff as needed, ask for information, et cetera. But it's important to maintain, sort of that hierarchical structure where they know that they are getting, their direction from one person so that they don't have conflicting direction. Another reason why it's really important to maintain that structure is that outside of those three ways that the board acts collectively, committees, on-site tasks, board members who are acting as individuals and not as board members, not as the board itself. The actions that are taken as the board itself are legally protected in certain ways, which is important. For example, as we're sitting here in the board meeting, you're having a debate or discussion, you're giving direction, there may be a disagreement, you know, but we have this, this process and this forum, where that can take place. And that process and the statements that are made in that process, the direction given, things like that, that's legally protected. You are acting, as an elected board, and that's protected by the First Amendment. So if, you know, for example, somebody were to make some statement and somebody thought, well, you're defaming me, or the staff member had a concern about something that was said, that sort of stuff. There's protection within those functions of the board as appointed. When you start having a lot of interaction between individual board members and staff members outside of those functions as it's set up under the law, two things happen, one practical and one potentially legal. The practical issue is you suddenly have the potential for a staff member to get conflicting direction from the general manager or from the board member. The legal consideration that potentially arises out of that, as soon as you start having those extra interactions, potential direction, what we've seen over the years, and I think this bears out, your district as well as the other districts are members of the California Special District Association. I do a lot of work for SDRMA, which is the risk management JPIA. What we see is that the more interaction that you have through individual board members, through staff members, and not through the general manager, the number of personnel matters and problems that tend to arise goes way up because of the confliction, because of staff confusion.
So Josh, I think that is one of the really critical pieces of that, my understanding, which is that none of us as individual board members, unless it's under one of those three situations, is authorized to speak for the whole board. So for any one of us to have a communication directly with the staff member, if we were to give any kind of direction at all, it wouldn't have come from the consensus that is a requirement of us acting.
That is absolutely correct, and you're right ahead of me and where I'm going on that. And the reason that becomes an issue legally, one, you may have a staff member saying, well, the director told me to do something, I had to do it, I thought he was speaking on behalf of the board, right? But other than those three situations, you're not speaking on behalf of the board unless it's in a meeting and committee or in some designated role. And what happens then is the actions of an individual director outside of what's authorized under the law as what you do as a board, you then potentially create personal liability for yourself because you're not acting as a board member, you're acting as an individual, and you're potentially exercising authority beyond what is available to you under the law. Now, that said, this does not mean that as board members and as a board, you don't have any input on what happens with the staff, you don't have any ability to get information that staff may have, et cetera. It's just that communication and direction needs to go through the general manager. You all have the ability, and not to put Scott on the hot seat or throw anybody under the bus. When you sit as a board or as a committee, you can tell them, Scott, we need this information, we want this done, I want this to happen. And if he doesn't make that happen, you can fire him, you can replace him, you can do whatever you want, right? But that is how it's set up under the law. One, for the protection of the district itself, and two, for the protection of the board members. So that's sort of the big broad strokes of it. It's a little counterintuitive. It seems like sort of in a way it's set up to, why is this set up to just impede us from getting things done? All I want to do is report this issue. All I want to do is get this information. And I understand that as a practical matter, I understand that, but that's not the reason for it. The reason is to make sure there's clear lines of communication. The reason is to make sure that the district itself is protected. The reason is to make sure that, the employees have the best working environment possible. And I can tell you, in situations both where I think, the director was out of line and in situations where I think they won't, not at this district, but in other districts, I have seen multiple personnel and employment cases that arose out of an employee feeling like, well, I'm either just the director's making them uncomfortable, or feeling like they're being asked for information, or that they're not sure if they should turn over, they think it should go to the general manager, et cetera. So it really eliminates a lot of potential problems, and also very importantly, it maintains the maximum amount of protection for our elected officials, and you all.
100%. You know,
Go ahead.
you've made a great case. I don't have any questions about that aspect of it. There's a couple of specific practical scenarios that came up. One is, you know, we all live in a small community. Many of the staff live in the same community. We see and interact with each other. Is there any, I mean, obviously, like, outside of just those social interactions, it's natural for a conversation to turn to our mutual, you know, jobs.
Sure.
And, you know, other than, you know, I'm at a function, having a conversation with an operator or whoever staff, you know, other than telling them, hey, tomorrow when you're on the job, it'll be like, obviously that's, you know, but is there any other advice or input with regard to, you know, how those interactions should or couldn't go?
You know, practically speaking, my recommendation is that you kind of analyze it the same way you would for something under the Brown Act, right? When we talk about the collective group of the directors together, you all can certainly get together and socialize, right? You can be at the same events and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that until you start getting into substantive discussion of the business of the district. So I just kind of look at it from that perspective. Socializing, you know, saying hello, how's work been, that kind of stuff. In general, not a problem, not a problem. I do think it's better to be more careful, right? To be a little more restrictive and conscious of that, just because of the nature of the position, and the situation that we're talking about. But it doesn't mean that you don't have to avert your eyes or avoid talking to somebody or saying hi or doing things like that. I don't know if that's helpful or. Or if you're looking for someone more specific.
Yeah, so we're having a conversation about, you know, district business. If it's just Brown Act, the only consideration that I can think of is that I would then go and take that conversation I had, talk to two other board members separately about that, like that. But there's no real restriction, you know, we're having a beer together and we're talking about how's the factory operating, you know, the plant operating, how's it, like, whatever, just whatever happens to come up.
Sure.
I don't see any restrictions under the Brown Act for having any of those conversations.
And when I say sort of the Brown Act analysis, I mean, not from the perspective of how many people are you talking to. I mean, from the perspective of what subjects are the type of subjects you shouldn't be talking to two other directors about. If that makes sense.
And applying that to.
And applying that to interactions with employees.
So not having the same conversation that I'm having with employee one, with employee two?
No, I apologize if I was unclear. I'm not looking at it, when I say using the Brown Act as a metaphor, an analogy, not for the purposes of how many people you're talking to, just for the purposes of the type of topics that we're talking about. For example, you can talk to 3 different directors about your vacation. Not a problem, right? That's not a Brown Act violation. But if you talk to 3 different directors about how you think that the district is functioning or some specific issue about the district, that is an area where you can have a Brown Act violation. So I'm not talking about don't talk to 3 employees. I'm talking about for purposes of your own analysis. I like to think about, well, is this conversation going to an area where if I were to have this a conversation about the same topic with 2 other directors, that would be a Brown Act violation. So it's for purposes of analyzing the content of the conversation, not the number of people. And that's not
understood, but say that the content of the conversation that is covered. In other words, it's Brown Act because it should be public, not private, right? But you're saying don't have a single conversation in those categories of topic?
I'm saying the best practice as directors, not acting as a board in those 3 areas that we're talking about, is not to have extended substantive conversations with employees of the district about district business. It's not illegal, right? You certainly can do it, but it's sort of a best practice, and you should be very clear in that situation that you're talking as an individual and not as a board member and that sort of stuff. The easiest thing to do is just not to have those conversations, but I understand what you're saying, and I'm not here, I'm certainly not here saying, you know, or sitting up here trying to lecture or say, don't talk to any employee about anything ever. I'm just trying to give you a basis for what the law is, talk about some of the considerations that we have, and sort of give you some information on best practice.
That's super appreciated. I'm just left with that. I'm not seeing any issue as long as I don't, as a result of one of those conversations, say, so then when you get to the job tomorrow, go and do this. Like, that seems like the only restriction I'm coming away with.
Yeah, that would certainly be something that you should not do, is do something like that. So, did you want to add?
I was just gonna add, and maybe it's not necessarily what you as directors do or say, it's what the employee says to you that you take away that's not correct or wrong on something that, whatever the conversation is. Does that make sense?
And then potentially pass along misinformation.
Yeah.
Okay.
That, I
I'm
mean,
gonna do that.
I can see that realistically happening, right? Like, if you say something about the office, the operators, they're not gonna know what's going on in the office, and vice versa.
Well, that's
So-
a good culture, like, not to practice, you know,
Yeah.
something about each other behind each other's back and stuff like
It's
that.
when, if you hear something, you talk to one of the staff, I mean, I'll even offer this, call me and say, hey, so-and-so said this, what is this about?
Right.
Can we talk more about the turbidity in the river or stuff like that? I mean, I'm open to that. I was also just gonna add, sorry, Justin, take that away, but, I have no problem with having Doug call you or something if there's a question that's more pertinent for him to answer than me and say, you know, I don't, or we can do it together, so don't feel that you're restricted to just talking to me, but just, you know, going through the general manager is helpful, so I know it's kind of going on and can help staff get what they need to answer your question better. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And specifically, like I said, under the org chart, you know, Scott, Doug, myself, we all work forward. So, you know, that we are, if you have questions about legal, if you have questions.
Go
about
direct.
engineering, you should go to us.
Sure.
And the only other thing I wanted to add is we do have the director's manual that has a little more information and some guidance and some examples and things like that. So that's a great resource that's out there for you, but that's essentially all I had, unless there was any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. So if, for example, we want to help just make a good work environment, and it is mainly what we want to do, support the district, continue to make sure that our operators are happy, everybody's happy. Sometimes an operator or a laborer or somebody feels like they maybe can't come talk to some of the staff. You know, there may be ways that we could help, mainly the employee committee that can kind of, you know, get the individuals together and they feel like they can talk to the board member, not in risk of their job by having to go to the manager. This is where I think that the employee committee would come into play to try to support staff in making sure that the environment was something that was conducive for everybody. You know, so they could sit down and say, hey, what are some of the problems that they may not approach Scott with, you know? So he can help, just 1 second, you got me finish?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So just so they have a place that they can come to, you know, somewhere where, you know, an open environment where the employee committee could get together individually with the staff. They can say, hey, here's some of the problems, I just don't feel like I'm getting the communication from the office, or this is happening, or this is happening. And then that committee, as it's set up in the structure, comes back and reports to the board, says, hey, you know, we've interviewed all of them, and we've kind of seen the same thing. There's some communication lacking from the office to the staff. And then we kind of make recommendations and help out in order to help the environment become more friendly or, you know, it's a better working environment for everybody. So just something to help boost the district. I mean, that's really what we're all looking here to do. So I would think that that would fall in the pyramid that you were just talking about of, you know, starting with the committee. The committee then takes some interviews from the employees in order to kind of get a feel for what's going on that might not be reported from the lower end all the way up to the, you know, might want to come into Scott and say, hey, Scott, I'm really unhappy with this. But can have these conversations with us, knowing that then we can make and set policy that's gonna help everybody. That's all we want to do.
Don't
you wanna add or you wanna?
Yeah, I just want, I believe that you would have a human resources person who would handle that. When you have just two individual board members doing that, or one, whatever it is, you're getting a isolated discussion. You know, the employee might have a complaint that you agree with, but another board member might not. If you got two people there, you're not getting that full board reaction, your interaction with that, it becomes a one-sided conversation. I think from a liability standpoint, I think the human resources person, which if we don't have, we will have one. Those are the kind of things that if an employee has a complaint about something, with the general manager or anybody, they go to the human resources person, and that person wants to go out, and that person then I would bring it to the board, and bring it to the general manager.
And do we have such a person?
Do we have such a person? That's a good question.
HR.
HR,
How is HR handled in our district?
so HR is the general manager, responsible.
General manager.
That's right.
So to respond to what both of you were saying, because of the way the district is set up, it's supposed to be operated, the board directs like policy, but not the implementation of it. I would, if there was some concern about the HR structure within the district itself, I would highly recommend, something more along the lines of what President Barker was referring to, is setting up somebody as the HR person or HR department, or even an outside HR company. There's a number of different ways to do that. I would really, for a number of the reasons that are kind of the same, even though you would have some more protection, it was a committee, I would have some serious reservations and likely, I would have to look at it, consider it, but I would likely not advise you at all to set up an employment committee where directors themselves were interacting directly with employees. I think that would, potentially create a few problems, just within the function of the district
Can
itself.
we name one of those problems?
I'm sorry?
Can we name one of those problems that it would create?
I think it would probably be, probably, I think you could potentially pretty easily have a problem where, employees feel like it is, they have the ability to just go over the general manager's head, directly to a director, anytime.
No, actually, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I don't want the employee to come directly to me. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is the structure that you were talking about set up, that we have the employee committee set up maybe every 6 months or once a year, that they interview all the employees separately, and the employees can then bring positive change or negative change that we all want positive change. We want to say, hey, here's a communication issue. So I'm not, maybe there's a misunderstanding. I want the employee committee to be able to have the authority to meet with the employees on a set basis, say every, like maybe a 6-month review. Where they sit down and say, and all the employees come in and say, hey, we'd like to see this, we'd like to see this, and some things that they might not be able to talk to Scott, since Scott is the HR, you only have one person to go to. Maybe an HR separate, that was a good point, thank you for bringing that up, and I think that maybe that's something that we can all discuss as a board and see what works best. Maybe we do have an outside HR that then they report to, and then the HR then reports to the whole board, and the employee committee is eliminated altogether. But I think in some way, we do need to get some sort of, ability for the employees to have somebody that they can come to on a 6-month basis or once a year. They know the review's coming up, where the board's gonna reach out to them. They're gonna bring up some of these issues that they might not bring up directly to the general manager, because they feel like maybe they would get punished, or they wouldn't wanna tell them because there's these things that are happening that, they couldn't say. So some way they need to have an outlet to bring it to the board's attention, so we can help better the district, and make sure that, there's a happy work environment, that everybody's being heard, and whether that's a separate HR department, or one that we can hire out, or a 6-month review from the employee committee, or even a year. I mean, I'm open for whatever works for everybody, just to get, some kind of.
Sure. So just to clarify this, and tell me if I'm wrong, but by doing this, you're kind of stepping outside of the job description as a board of director. But to me, I've always been taught, board of director sets policy, stays away from all day-to-day operations, because that's how we have the other part of the team. So that, and spend money. So that's kind of our job to me. I mean, if I'm wrong, if we're supposed to handle HR problems at the lowest level, that, to me, that is the job of a board director. Or a director.
I agree with that.
I would tend, I mean, as an overall statement, I would definitely tend to agree with what you're saying. But I understand a little bit more about what you're saying. I think I sort of misunderstood. There is a memorandum of understanding with the employees that does provide a grievance process.
Which is,
I don't know the grievance process off the top of my head, but there is a way to submit grievances and escalate them and have review and things like that. If, you know, the board would like to have that process be, outside, you know, the direct purview of the general manager and use an outside HR process or, something like that, that's something we can certainly look at. There's something called a Skelly process and a Skelly hearing, right, where we have the ability to have hearings with people sitting on those boards from other agencies, right? So there is other oversight, because it's very difficult. We're talking about small districts with a limited amount of staff, right? We don't have a massive HR department, and probably, you know, we're probably not in a position to bring somebody on to be HR. But I understand what you're saying. It's a good inquiry, it's a good concern to make sure that you have a situation where you know, the employees feel like they have a legitimate process that they can go through, right? There won't be a negative ramification for them raising a real issue. I think that we do have something in place that probably covers that. I don't have any problem with relooking at that. I wouldn't want to give you any specific advice about, you know, how we should or shouldn't do that, or the process that you're talking about, without speaking to somebody that is more of an HR professional or has more of a specialty in employment law. There's a lot of perhaps for the unwary is something that judges like to use a lot when it comes to law, things like that when it comes to employment law. So if we're going to change something, we would be changing the MOU, which would require going through a different process, you know, with the employees and that sort of stuff that would have to be renegotiated. These are all things that can be done.
Yeah.
But I think perhaps maybe the first thing to do would be to look at providing everybody with the MOU and seeing if there are any questions about what the grievance process is. And if there are any concerns about what that process is, then we can look at whether that's something that needs to be changed or renegotiated. I mean, that is a
That's a good
process.
Yeah, I think we just need to get educated on what that current process is. I mean, there's clearly a process in place with other entities that are like us, and like, you know, it was brought to my attention that the city council and the city manager is a very similar kind of a situation to our board and our general manager, right? And they have an HR department, so if, you know, if by some chance the city manager would do something very inappropriate, the person who, you know, is the victim of that doesn't go to the city manager, they go to the HR department, and there's a whole process. So I think what Director Capps is bringing up is just potential conflict of interest of our general manager wearing both those hats.
And there's a process to go outside that, like we're talking about, there's a process to even go outside the entire district, right? You could have an area where you have, okay, here's the 3 people you go to, well, now they're all against me, what do I do, right? I'm being screwed over. But that process is legally in place, and that's called the Skelly process.
I'd love to get educated on that.
So perhaps, I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, perhaps the next step, at the next meeting, I could give a report about our MOU, about the grievance process.
Or even just email it. I mean,
Well, that's fine, either way.
I would like somebody that we don't necessarily have to report, but have, we can email it to everybody and we can review it, but have it on the agenda so we can discuss it once we've all reviewed it.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. And then to Director Burgess's point, I think I'm on the personnel, are we on, I'm on the personnel. I don't want to become an HR person, but I am curious, like, what is the role of the personnel committee?
Is negotiating the MOU,
That's it.
pretty much.
It's changes, if you want, it's in the MOU. Put in the same format that if the employee has got things that they're unhappy with, they can request to go to HR. Maybe we have a part-time HR or something that does it. Because when a specific question, and we've done it, and we've had it in the past. But if an employee is so dissatisfied that they want to have something and not go to the general manager, we'll put it in the MOU, here's what you do, you know, if you want to file this and you ask a request to have HR review it or what, some format, that they can then follow. And
That is what Josh was saying, it is in the MOU, that process.
And that process, like, I deal with this all the time, because my people are union, but so the union is the part of the one that goes to the management.
Right.
So you never get, the management never talks to the individual, it's always either through a union or an HR person, and that keeps everybody safe. That's basically, in my situation, the unions are the ones that bring the grievances forward,
And,
and we have to deal with them. And then with our
And having that third party is a great
Well,
idea,
that's
that's where they can go instead of, like Mason was saying, wearing both hats, you know, just being able to separate that and not, you know, so they don't have to go to Scott, they can have another outlet to then report to and then kick them off. So I'm over to review the MOU and then have more discussion on the next meeting.
Yeah,
Even the directors, clear from the liability.
absolutely,
And we don't want
that goes back to what I was talking
that.
about.
And once you step out of the comfort zone of these five, you're on your own, then you're personally liable, and then that gets very sticky.
So I'll put something together and I'll try and make sure that everybody has a copy of the MOU and, you know, if I need some summary on top of that, maybe perhaps I'll brief overview of some things like the Skelly process and what's out there to the extent it's not expressly covered as I believe that it is. And then I can answer questions.
That's
next
perfect,
meeting.
John.
That sounds
Yeah,
great.
that's great, thank you.
That's perfect.
Because it sounds like somebody's coming to complain to one of the directors here, and we need to tell them where they can go.
Well, the employees know, I assume they know about the MOU and the grievance process in there, so that is set up, and that's something that they're made aware of when they're hired, right? And it's all available to them, but, you know, we'll certainly give
We
you.
will make sure it's an adequate one that we're feeling comfortable with, that actually lets their voice be heard.
Absolutely.
And maybe too, it just, it might be handy because of all this discussion going on, is to have a little training session with the employees. Yeah, specifically, if you have issues and here's what your agreement says you can do, and just make sure they're aware of what, you know, all their options are.
Yeah, sounds great.
But once you take that out, it puts us in a whole different situation. Now we have to really watch what we say. So that's what I've always found the impression with, is just, you know, be really careful.
I would,
Issues there.
Well, thank you for your report, appreciate it, very informative.
I'd like to ask, if I could, a couple questions.
sure.
So I wanna understand the rules from this side of the table. So, because I don't wanna put people in a place they don't belong, but at the same time, I wanna have open communication. So
Sure.
I can talk to any one person, one-on-one about anything, that's okay.
Yeah, you're a member of the public, you can talk to any of your elected officials.
And then I can talk to two people at the same time, and that's okay.
Yeah, you can talk to two of them,
But I can't talk to three of them at the same
well,
time.
they can't.
If you are
It's not your fault.
No, I don't understand what they can do with me. So if I've got something going on here that I'm struggling with and I run into him out on the lake, I'm like, dude, you gotta help me out.
Sure, so.
Okay, so can I do that?
Yeah, so here's first of all, there's no way for you to get in trouble.
No, I
understand that, but if you're concerned about the district itself, here's where you would run into a problem. The second you start you can tell any director whatever you want,
Right.
right? And you can even tell all of the directors whatever you want, they're there, but the second, if they were all there and you say, hey, I really want you to do this thing about this problem. And if President Barker says, oh, I agree with you, we're gonna do something about that, that's a violation, you got 5 of them right there, okay, that's easy. The way that it becomes, that you could unwittingly facilitate a problem for the district would be if you talk to Director Yaffe about something and he said, I agree, that's a pretty big problem. And then you talk to President Barker about it, he says, I do think that is a problem. And then you go to talk to Director Capps and you say, hey, I wanna talk to you about this issue. And Director Barker and Director Yaffe both agree with me and they say this is a problem. once you communicate what they've said to them, that is what's called a hub and spoke violation, where you're facilitating information back and forth between the directors. So, the thing is, you can talk to
So
them.
they should just say, you can't tell me what he said.
Well,
But I can
We're
make
just
my
supposed to
case.
flush your ears and go, "Ning, ning, ning."
No,
But like, can I take,
but what I'm saying is, if for you to not, be an unwitting conduit for a violation, what you should not do is tell any of the other directors what the other directors told you about it. Does that make sense?
yeah, so, but like, can I go to him and say, listen, I got this problem? And then can you talk to the other board
No,
members,
that
like
goes
send
to
an email?
He can in a board meeting. He can,
But not outside
but
of.
not outside of the meeting.
The hub and spoke goes the same way, so you can talk to him, you talk to him, and then once you talk to all three of them, then there's the hub. You can talk to him, if he starts calling him and him, it's the same thing. They
So
cannot, you
Is
cannot.
there any method by which the public can speak to the board other than being in this room at this meeting once a month? Like, if I wanted their attention, like if I have a problem, can I email the 5 of them and go, listen, guys, I'm having this problem and I'd like you guys to bring this up in a meeting? Like, I've been in lots of situations where I've been able to get to the board.
Sure.
Right? I can get to the board at Heritage Ranch. Right? So, but to get to this board, I have to go through management. So my point is there a way that you're allowed to communicate with the board or have a meeting with the board outside of this forum? So I'm just trying to understand, because people, like, I'm on other boards, like in homeowners association.
Right.
And people will bring stuff to me, and then we'll have our closed session first, opposite, like I told you, like, we'll have our closed session. And at that time, I'll say, people want to discuss tonight at the meeting, this problem, they're breaking into the door and they're stealing mail and they want to talk about it.
So
And I'll share that with the board.
here's the difference.
Yeah.
A homeowners association is not a public agency, it's not covered by the Brown Act. So the same rules don't apply.
Right.
So you can, with a private board, with the board of a hospital, with the board of HOA, the board of any kind of non-public agency, you can kind of have whatever communication you want, because they aren't subject to the Brown Act. So, and you, as a citizen, right, within the jurisdiction, you can make any kind of communication that you want to the board members, but as their attorney, I'm gonna tell them that they all get an email from you, and you email all 5 of them. I'm gonna say, don't respond to that email, because it's gonna be a Brown Act violation. Let's discuss this in the appropriate thing in closed session, just like I would tell them, if CJ told you that he has this problem, don't all 5 of you go discuss this, and he doesn't know what you're talking about. You are entitled to know what the collective group of them are talking about, unless it's something that falls into closed session. You're entitled to be here and participate, all the other members of the public are entitled to be here and participate. So you can absolutely tell them whatever you want, but for them to uphold their obligations, they need to have those discussions amongst the 5 of them sitting.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, because the process for me, sitting here, feels like a few months ago, I brought all kinds of information, problems, and I'm months down the road, and I'm still like, I feel like I can't get to them to get something resolved. It takes forever. So that's why I wanted to understand the process, because like today I left at 12:15 from LA and drove so I could be here today. And in the morning I'll go right back, because this is the only way I can speak to them. But if I could speak to them in another fashion, I probably would have stayed home today. But I don't want to miss something, and I don't want to lose another month, right? So like, there's no way to communicate. with
Well, the
this.
challenge is that you can communicate with us. We just have to be very careful about communicating back with you outside of this venue,
Right,
because it has to be public.
okay. I just, like I said, you were explaining the Brown Act,
Sure.
so I just wanted to get it from my side so that I could figure out if there's a method by which I
could.
could.
In that direction, once we fine tune the L3 and get into a teams type of situation where we can have communications, we need our
Yeah.
on-site and different. That's what's gonna
But
happen.
that's why I can communicate differently with you guys at Heritage, because they're not a,
They're not that big.
public
Davis
agency.
Sterling Act, Brown Act, Davis.
Right, no, I totally understand that, so I just wanted to wrap my brain around. Yeah, I wanted to wrap my brain around all the other boards that I work with, like I can tell him about a problem and he can talk to the board and then they can get back to me and.
But
Right.
when it comes to that, hub and spoke thing, we have the same issues on the other boards too. We're held by the same standards of this one where we can't speak to each other and bring, we can't get a quorum by speaking to each other.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, that's good. I just wanted to make sure I got it.
Okay.
The world, you see.
Good guy.
Okay, this is the, submittal for approval for resolution 2301, initiating proceedings and establishing of water and sewer standby charges for property within the district for fiscal year 23-24. The recommendation is to approve that resolution and then be scheduling a public hearing for May 18th to confirm the standby charges. A little background on standby charges really quick is, they're a parcel-based source of revenue available to public agencies to defray costs of having certain benefits available to the public, the parcel, sorry. Specifically, government code section, it's entitled Uniform Standby Charge Procedures Act, and there's a little verbiage of it there that gives the authorization for agencies to collect these charges. And Heritage Ranch has done this since 1991 at least, to collect the charges for costs to sustain water and or sewer services, including debt service, primarily on the water treatment plant side, and some maintenance and operations costs. Debt service, for example, we have the 2 water treatment plant loans, that total $162,367, that's available to all the parcels within the district. And then there's a small maintenance cost also associated with each of these. And I should say that these are separate from user fees because some of these cost items are required whether you use the treatment plant or not, for example. You have to pay the debt service, for example. You have to pay the permit cost. You have to pay for that $27 an acre foot water. So that's why this is separate to all parcels, because there's parcels here that aren't hooked up to the system yet, that it could be at any time. So they should contribute to these standby charges. And then in the financial considerations, we kind of just lay out, this has been the same since the beginning of the dollar per parcel. It's $98 for the water side and $21 for sewer. And these are separated out because not all parcels have the sewer element. As you know, the larger parcels are on septic, so they don't have to pay that $21 a year. And then the second table is actually the use by charge and what it's used for. And I kind of just spoke to that, the $162,000 for the debt service on the water side, and then the smaller maintenance costs there itemized out of $40,000 in each of the sewer and water in rounded numbers. And so this is a two-step process. We'll have another public hearing, but this one kind of initiates the charges and sets the resolution to do that and set the public hearing on May 10th.
I move that we approve this resolution.
Okay,
You want to take public on that?
How much does that translate to to each person?
$500 a year.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
and well,
Thanks.
you never see it's on your tax.
Yeah.
Of course. So basically, Scott, this is something we do every year. And we do it, we have to approve it because it may raise and change. And then once we approve it, then it goes, it lets the county take it from our, put it on the tax bill if there's.
Yeah, the dollar amounts don't change. They are established already by, yeah.
What do they?
But the number of parcels could change.
Right,
If somebody,
but it's all it's doing is just allowing the county to put it on the tax roll.
yeah.
So if the number of parcels change, theoretically go down then because you're dividing by more numbers, is it gonna be that same number times the new?
Well, it's the $98 for water and $21 for sewer per parcel, so depends on what parcel you lose. Like, I think it's happened in 1990 a few times where a lot got consolidated into one parcel, so now they just, instead of 2, we're only getting 1 source of revenue for that.
And that's why they change APNs, because
And how's the dollar amount set? Is set by the county?
It was set at some time before me of what that number is through the public process in this standby charge act. I'd have to go back and research on finding that actual document in my hands to know.
Somehow we just came up with the cost and said, this is how much we can put on there, this is fair, and this is how much we're charging, and that's how it's stayed before you've been here.
Right,
And that's been the 98 and the 21.
yes. Yeah, and the thing is, why I started looking into it, because in a few years, 2029, one of the debt service loans is gonna be paid off. So then that just kind of raised my question, well, are we allowed then to use that standby charge of the $98 for water for something else?
And
We didn't get that far yet. It's on my radar to look at in 2020.
Well, and the follow-up question is, if we had to incur a bunch of other additional debt service as a result of these new projects, does that potentially change?
Maybe, that's what we're gonna look into. Can we then just print, this says, did it say you can collect $98 and $21 for debt service? Period, or did it say debt service for the water treatment plant? Or something like that? Does that make sense?
it does.
Okay.
2029.
Any other discussion?
Nope.
I'm good.
Have a second, have a first?
I'll second.
Thank you. I had the first, so you get the second, thank you. Roll call vote on that. Director Pat?
Yes.
Director Burgess?
Yes.
Director Barker?
Yes.
Director Camus?
Yes.
Director Yap?
Yeah, that's one. Item number E.
I couldn't do anything anyway, sorry about
I thought we were supposed to schedule here, oh, I did schedule it.
that.
D,
You got any part of?
No, exactly. Just want to make sure that we got it.
Okay.
You know, we're-
Here to schedule it.
here. You just approved the next. Unless you wrote it down.
You talking the.
Yeah, I think you got parts 1 and 2 on there.
There, that's what I'm saying, there's two parts, just together, the second part.
What's part
for both parts, yes.
Did get it.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I second the ball.
Thank you.
Oh, you're waiting for me on D, right?
Mm-hmm.
D, okay, sorry about that. So this is the received report revisiting the original wastewater treatment plant improvements preliminary engineering memorandum from MKN and provide direction to staff for proceeding with the water resource recovery facility project. Just some background, at the February meeting, the board directed staff to revisit this report and return to the board with some recommendations and discussion about it, and Doug has been working diligently since then to, have this report, so the staff report, I'm gonna turn it over to Doug at this point to talk about this item. Doug?
Why, thank you. Yeah, so it was actually, I just realized I had an error, and it was actually the January meeting that you directed me to do that. I wasn't here for the February meeting. So just to revisit sort of what the MKN study or the MKN engineering analysis, just to kind of give you the background. This is all in the report, but I can summarize it for you. In 2018, the district received our waste discharge requirements and our national pollution discharge elimination system permit. There were revisions made to that, and in that, we were then deemed out of compliance with the permit effluent limits for copper, unionized ammonia, and nitrate. And so in order to get into compliance, we need to basically revise our wastewater treatment plant to treat it to the new requirements. And so the board at the time contracted with MKN to look at different options for how to meet those revised requirements. So they looked at 4. One was modifications to the existing pond with what's called diffused aeration and a bioreactor. 2 would be an in-pond extended aeration system, and the third is activated sludge packaged wastewater treatment plant, and the 4th is a packaged wastewater treatment plant with membrane bioreactor. They looked at a bunch of different criteria,
how it impacted the existing treatment process, the footprint that it would require, how well it would treat the water, you know, to ensure we were compliant. If it had any impacts to the copper concentration, how we're gonna handle sludge, potential to improve treatment plant redundancy, the cost, of course, and then O&M costs as well. So they looked at each of these four, and to basically give you the pluses and minuses of each, the diffuse aeration of bioreactor would be reusing the existing ponds and installing some additional equipment. That's great, because we already have the ponds, it's got low operational requirements, it's kind of a set it and forget it sort of setup, and it's got better redundancy over what we currently have. And lastly, it's got the lowest estimated capital cost of all the options. The drawbacks, we'd have to replace the liners, so we'd have to take the ponds out of service, and that would require, we'd have to bring in temporary treatment equipment. And in my opinion, looking at their analysis of that, that's sort of difficult. That number, I think, was a bit low, in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. That's just a little side note. It also had the lowest estimated effluent water quality, so you're spending money to revamp what you have, and you may be in compliance, and you may not in 10 years.
That's a question I have on that. So this is item number 2 for you. I mean, you're.
This is alternative one.
This is alternative, and your selection towards the end, this is the second best.
No, actually, the next one is the second
The
best.
next one's the second best, okay.
Yeah, so, and that was actually MKN's findings too, and I just, in my spoiler alert, in my findings, if you didn't read to the end, I agree with what MKN found. But I actually.
Alternative number 2 is the second best one.
Correct, but I found that alternative 2 was less close in second place than they found, just based on, and I can go through what my basis was, but here, like, their top choice was here, and then their second choice was here, and I'm like, top choice is here, and second choice is here. And then I can go into those reasons, and I don't have to go through all this, you know,
I read I don't know if everybody else has read the report.
I read it as well.
Completely, so I'm pretty familiar with what's going on here. I have some questions. I don't know if everybody wants to hear him.
The only question I have is what per alternative were the estimated costs?
So I wasn't tasked with looking at the costs per se of these alternatives, it was more looking at what they had found. And then I did look at costs, but my costs were more relative, like their costs were accurate, not in the magnitude of them, in my opinion. Not in the magnitude of the cost, but in their relative cost from one option to the next. In that option, alternative 4 would be the most expensive, but it's not that number necessarily. But basically what it came down to for me was I felt that your compliance, the water quality, the effluent quality was, as they deemed it as well, was the top priority. But the risk associated with what they did was they took like, okay, we give this a weighting of 50, and this is ranked 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the one that's ranked number 4 times 58 is 200 points for this criteria. Well, to me it's not that simple in that your risk associated with being the lowest water quality and the amount versus the amount of money you're putting out for the difference. That's a lot of money to lay out and not be compliant. And in 10 years, you might not be compliant, but you can at least say, if you go with the higher level of treatment, which is the membrane bioreactor, you can say, even if in 10 years they change your discharge requirements change, even if they come back and say, you're out of compliance, well, you say, well, at the time we put this in, this was the best technology available to us. Not, we took what we had in place and we tried to fancy it up as best we could. This will get you to compliance most likely with the alternatives 1 and 2, but for how long? is really the.
Well, and that's my question too, is how long, so that's a major factor in this decision. Right? I mean, that's gotta be the major factor.
Well, and I think-
How long is this gonna be, so where, we need that information, and how do we find that information, and my mind is two ways. One, we reach out to the regulators themselves, you know, just in like, if you're in the car business, you know where it's going right now. Electric car, zero emission, you know, it's easy, it's out there.
Right.
This is not as out there as that, but I think we can find out some information on, one, reach out to the regulators, what do they see in 10 years? You know, we could reach out to them and say, hey, where do you see our numbers in 10 years? And then also knowing what have they changed in the last 10 years? Where is the chart, you know, what are the major changes that happened in the last 10 years?
Right.
I think that copper was one of them, if I can remember correctly, they changed the copper output, and then ammonia's just been a problem that our system is not. I don't know that they changed the requirements, but I'm not sure about that. But that would be information that I would want to make a decision, would be what have they changed over the last 10 years, so we can see where it's going?
Right.
And what do the regulators themselves think that they're gonna see in the next 10 years, so we'll know what kind of numbers we're working with.
I don't think the regulators even know, because they're get a whole new batch coming in, the whole idea.
Right.
So things are gonna change.
Yeah, that's what I think.
You can't even, it's looking for a crystal ball, it's not gonna be compared.
I agree. I don't think this is knowable. I mean, we might be able to get, those are great questions. We might be able to get, you know, be able to cite down that line a little bit better by having those answers. But I don't think anybody knows it really well. But I do think this is what convinced me away from those first two options, which is that what does seem clear to me is that it's only gonna be more restrictive in the future, right? And we were already seeing what the conversation I had earlier with the EPA testing these new chemicals, like, that's only going to keep happening in a
And
variety of different ways.
And those that become,
That's history gonna find, every time I've admitted and renewed, there's been added
They did an added.
additions to it, every
Yeah.
one, and
And so that's the bottom line, is it doesn't seem like these options, they give us the lowest quality of water, but they also give us the least flexibility to achieve greater standards in the future. So that was kind of what got me, like, I was really curious about these, I'm like, I like the ponds, I already said, I like the ponds. But this convinced me that that's not viable for even the near term, much less the long term.
and even on the other, like with the packaging plant, I mean, how is that thing gonna be able to do the same thing, where it lasts for longer and longer, or are they gonna change the regulations to where that equipment is gonna be inadequate?
So we don't even know if that's gonna cover.
I know, the whole, it's all about that.
We should, I think, I would like to hear what the regulators had to say, you know, just to reach out.
I got this, I mean,
For what they think, or what, and I'd like to see what the changes have been over the last 10 years.
well, if we're looking into, like, what we talked about earlier with PFAs or PFAS, I can never say it right, but what they're looking at with that, I mean, there's always the possibility that could become a requirement on the wastewater side of things as well. And so, but that's not to say that anybody's told me that, but once things happen on one end, they usually happen on the other end too, eventually, to a certain extent. What you're doing by going with, yes, it's alternative 4 is the most expensive, but it's also the best available technology. And if you look at, for me, you know, when I was analyzing the situation, and one of the things that I changed in MKN's analysis was I made the cost a sliding scale, because it's not, oh, the most expensive gets 1 point and the least expensive gets 4, they're all expensive. Right, in the grand scheme of things, they're all a sizable chunk of money, and so the delta between, yes, it's not a negligible delta between the two. But if you look at the impact, and I wasn't, you know, designated to deal with costs, but I had to look at them just, you know, kind of a due diligence standpoint. If you look at the difference in your end results in terms of your rates from one option to the other, in the grand scheme of things versus your potential for violation, I don't see the cost difference being worth the risk associated with it. Now, on the back end of that, that's not to say that, like, the costs we've been discussing that gave everyone justifiable pause, that's not to say that we just accept those costs either, and that's kind of our job, or my job, Scott's job in dealing with WSC, the consultants on the project is to provide value engineering where, one issue that I found between, say, what MKN did and then where WSC went with it was on when we determined flows and loads. A potential area for cost savings is that the previous board directed us to design for, eventual build out, which is substantially more flow than what we currently see. So one area in which we could realize a cost savings now would be to scale down the size of the plant now to meet current and slightly future flows and install like the underground infrastructure like conduit and the piping and the pad, but not the equipment itself, not the additional reactor and things like that. We would realize a cost there, but we'd be ready for future expansion if needed. And then that cost, could be associated with future development.
Well, and this is the fundamental benefit to me of the package unit of the site build, because we can size the package unit the way we need it now, and we can readily add tents to it later if and when we need, whereas the site build, we're kind of committing to the whole deal. It's not like you can just upgrade the site build as readily.
And then if we don't, put all the options into it.
Weren't they designing it though, to be able to upgrade for future?
The design, the most recent flows and loads were for the eventual build out. And so there's a cost savings there in that we put in the infrastructure associated that we could expand then, but this gives you like more of a modular concept. And this is something that the staff would work with consultants to fine tune that, to value engineer it, see like some of it might be with the bigger pad. Might not be worth it to do the pad now and just put the conduit underground, whatever the case may be. But those are things that we'll address or different options in terms of flow equalization. There's just myriad different items that we'll look at to save the cost. And I just want, from a personal standpoint, like I like my job here and I want to stay here and I want to optimize the way that we are treating wastewater. And I'm gonna do everything I can to sharpen my pencil and provide or in my part to provide the best system that we can have to meet those things while keeping it as, cost conscious as possible. It's an expensive undertaking and I understand that. There was one other item that Scott and I discussed earlier and I'm forgetting. Oh yeah, so another issue where if you were to read the MKN report in there, they discuss my initial understanding of it before I read the MKN report, back when I started here, my initial understanding was that the MKN, they looked at a membrane bioreactor plant, package and a site built one and compared the two. Well, they didn't. I don't mean to like explain something if you guys already know this, but they didn't look at it. They basically, dismissed the site build out of hand just because it was more expensive at the flow rates that they were looking at. But where we are in, depending on your perspective, we're in sort of a sweet spot or a sour spot of our plant is on the higher end of where it's obvious that a package plant is the most cost effective. And we're on the lower end where it's obvious that a site build is most cost effective. I think if we can scale back on the modularity approach, that will definitely get more into where then this is just my opinion, but where the package plant will be more cost effective. The smaller your flows, the lower your flows are, the more cost effective the package plant becomes.
So my thought on that is keep the package plant to the minimum plus a certain small percentage of the growth. Try not to put all the bells and whistles on it, make it adaptable to maybe new regulations, because in 10 years, they might not be getting, so these may work. In 15 years, the regulations may change, and the added pieces to the packaging may have to change to adapt to the regulations. So if we try to, there's no crystal ball, in 10 years, in 20 years, 30 years, this is going to work. We don't know that. But if you set up this package plan, and this is my opinion, to just bare minimum plus a small percentage of growth, the cost down, have it expandable. And then you change regulations, and we still have the money to fix it up, because there's another 5 or 10 years to fix it up. So, and then option one and two would be gone because they won't work anyways. So I don't agree with 1 and 2. I mean, I like the cost of one. I think it'll probably go 15, 20 years, but I don't think it'll go very long, much longer than that.
Yeah, the footprint, like, as a criteria, that's important to most places. For us, I mean, given, we do have an extensive amount of land, so like options 1 and 2, from a footprint standpoint, even though they're like the least desirable, that doesn't impact us. We would be okay with that. In my opinion, it's like the MBBR removable bed bioreactor seemed appealing, but like, I think Dylan, you and I were talking, we'd be the only ones on the west coast that had that. I mean, so why do we wanna be that? I wouldn't wanna risk that, you know, for the small amount of potential cost savings to be this kind of white elephant that our regulators are gonna look at us and say, why do you guys have to be difficult?
When we become famous, you win, you lose.
Yeah.
You'll be famous.
I mean, there's a lot of regulators at the bottom of that pond, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. But there's a lot of information in this report, and obviously I'm fine talking for any length of time, but I'm totally willing to stop.
No, that's great, thank you, this analysis is really, really good. I mean, you took apart the way that MKN did it, and pointed out all of the places I thought where their final analysis was, their assumptions were just not, totally right on, and so I think at the end, it makes it clear that the package plan is even further out ahead in terms of its benefits, than the previous analysis showed, so thought it was really well thought out, thank you for preparing it.
You bet, thanks.
Yeah, my only question would be, what are the costs? You know, I'd like to know what they are between, you know, how much are we talking about, you know, the pond expansion versus the package unit? I mean, is there huge savings? And, you know, I agree, I understand what you're saying, that the regulators might not know, but they may have a plan, like the city has a plan, and, you know, they may have, hey, in the next 10 years, we have these things, and if we're talking about a $10 million cost difference between those ponds, and, you know, but what is that? We don't know, we don't have any of these costs. It would be nice to just, even at the back of a napkin thing would be, hey, here's how much we think this is gonna be, just to kind of take a look at it at the next meeting, to say, here's what the regulators are saying, here's what we've seen for the last, you know, 10 years, and here's a kind of a back of the napkin cost between the two. Yeah, this is gonna be $8 million more, but we're gonna have a lot more flexibility. This is gonna be, you know, $8 million less, and it appears like it's gonna last for the next 10 years based on the regulators and where the charter is gonna go on it. I just like to see that. I mean, I don't think that's gonna hurt too much to just see some.
No, I understand. No, it's just, you don't know what the regulators are gonna do. In 5 years, it's gonna be exactly.
Yeah, even the packaging.
Exactly, that's what I'm thinking. So I think at this point, probably trying to get the best bang for our buck and see roll the dice, because it could change. And we could be, they could be looking at another project with this, all the whole township in 15 years.
Right, I mean, I told Scott, you know, I would love to tell you, you're gonna have a project that's compliant in 30 years, and it costs you $4 million.
We'll take it.
Right.
That
That would be okay.
You're authorized.
Yeah, I would love to tell you that, and I can't tell you that, but I would be lying. I didn't tell you what you want to hear, but it's definitely true. But no, just know that we are at an very early phase of this project, and I am well aware, and I share your concerns over cost, and we will do whatever we can throughout whatever project you guys deem that we do. We will do everything within our power to value engineer the crap out of it.
Exactly, excellent.
Literally, you're back on track.
Yeah, literally.
But I just think, considering makes a lot of sense. How long is that $10 million are you good for? Which are, you know, what, investment return or whatever.
Any comment from the public? No. So direction on this, Scott?
Well, the results is kind of construed as a recommendation too. Doug and I talked about this after I wrote recommendation in the results title there. We've been going down the path to do the package MBR plan. We have the agreement with WSC to do that, and I would look for direction, to be honest, if I had to say what the recommendation is to direct staff to continue that MBR package design with value engineering involved and answer some of those questions you brought up today.
Can we take one more month to get a little bit, because this is just the basic stuff.
I want to see the numbers.
I want to see the numbers too before we move forward with the package, and I think we can still keep, WSMC on hold, for now, and just get one more, you know, we were just diving into this, I think we're down to just 2 right now, so we don't need to see 4, we're down to the top 2 picks.
Okay.
You know,
But I'd like to see like 2 picks and numbers. Yeah, okay, because so you still, it would be good.
So essentially, the way back when Lincoln gave their best guess at what the numbers for those 2 options would be, and so we're asking for our own engineers' best guesstimate of those options in today's terms. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I can base it on, you know. It's gonna be a range, right? It's not gonna be,
It's a guesstimate.
right, but it's all relative, like, I can look at recent projects of similar size and scope and type, and give you a ballpark for each, and then you can weigh the cost difference between those. But that's not to say, there are many things that we, like initially, in the initial project, we were talking about, you know, new building and things like that, and we don't need to, and we're not planning on doing that, right? We can throw out items that aren't absolutely necessary and get it as bare bones as possible.
Yep.
Can I ask you a question, Doug? Let me ask that a question. So in your reanalysis, can you answer the board's question of what the cost difference is relatively to these based on your scoring? Like say, if 4 is $15 million, what would 2 be?
Yeah, so
Does that make sense?
yeah, I don't have.
We're not.
I don't have what 2 came in at, I only have in my summary example, what 1 came in at, yeah, so they had option 4 at 16 million, give or take. They had option 1 at 9.5, I think option 2 was probably in the 10 to 11 range. I believe.
That number, package unit was that's 19? What'd you say?
So, it'd be 16 times 0.59. I did write in there, I didn't write the actual number, I just wrote the percentage.
Okay. I don't know if that's helpful now anyways, but it was.
So it was 9.5 million versus 16 million, so it was about 40%. The package plant or the option 2 was 60% of the cost of option 4. So if you're talking, say, round numbers, and it was 20 million, then you'd be at 12 million.
And we can closely get what option 4, and we have a bid from the manufacturer. We have some idea of, some rough numbers of what our flows are, so we know how much for, you know, what we got from the manufacturer. We can probably get our option, 4 closer than what MKM was at, so we'll know that, but I understand we'll probably have to use some of the data for alternate 2 from the MKM.
Right, well, and also, what we have to realize there, so we have, it's 60%, their cost for 2 was 60% of the cost of 4, but out of 2 and 4, they also left out things that weren't considered in their cost that would have to be in both of them. So that 60% it might actually be 70% of the cost, because there were things that weren't in the scope.
That's great, I'd love to see that.
But yeah, I can look at it all four.
Nah,
No, I think just the two, it's all.
I get
yeah,
The funds make sense money wise, they don't make sense longevity.
Well, the thing about option two that was a positive was we could, and they didn't really discuss it, but I think we could use the land directly behind us, keep that in place during construction, and then, because it would be new ponds, I believe is what. This was a while ago when I finished reading it, but
Doug, one of the things I think I heard you say earlier is that in coming up with these estimates, you can kind of go high end or low end depending on how much how conservatively you figure the project, right? Like,
and how redundant you want the project to be, for example, because we're gonna do flow equalization, and so in doing that, you can take your flow and spread it out over a larger period of time. So your flow coming out of the plant is lower, but it's all day as opposed to a shorter period of time at higher flows. And so in that you'd have, because we do have room, we could, if our flows go up, I mean, we could technically work on, added flow equalization as well, I would imagine.
So smaller plant in sense, a little cheaper money,
Right.
put all the sewer into one of our ponds and then slowly put it in so it's equalized and.
Right, or one of them is kind of the plan, and like, for example, Cosina on their package. In doing this report, like I spoke with, San Miguel, CSD, Kelly Dodds, right? Yeah, Kelly Dodds is the general manager, and he's a former wastewater operator and everything, so they look at they're doing an MBR, but it is slightly larger.
Yeah, about 25,000 gallons a day, bigger than what we had scoped.
Right, so it's slightly larger than ours, and they looked at site built versus packaged, and one of their deterring factors for doing site built was just the lay of their land. They have a use for their reclaimed water, whereas we haven't necessarily identified one, but they have a future use for the reclaimed water, and how and where that was gonna be distributed, it didn't make sense to put it on the other side of their existing plant. They're like the opposite of us in that everything gravitates to their wastewater treatment plant and everything is pumped to ours.
What are they gonna do with their recycled water?
Hydrants and their WSC's actually. the
Yeah, we're
district
the
engineer.
on that. They've got some wineries potentially that have interest in it, so they're working on a program to deliver water out to wineries, and then also they're talking about a pipe network in town for fire protection. Just as a point of reference, I think their current cost estimate is 27 million for 0.325 package MBR plant,
With recycled water?
total program cost.
But that includes the new building, right?
Yeah, they have a building, it's not a direct linear comparison, it's just sort of a, ballpark estimate.
They're putting in like their operation and maintenance office building.
Yeah, they're building a very nice.
Yeah, so that's gotta be, and we're gonna do, tenant improvements on our existing buildings, like that's an example of where we'll see.
Shipping containers.
Those are great,
a stool with an umbrella.
there you go.
It's cool.
Never gets lost.
So then we're just gonna get the two alternatives and rough numbers from you on the next meeting, and can we reach out to the regulators just to hear what they have to say on the next 10 years, and then also see the data of what the changes have been for the last 10 years?
Devin, I could, if you guys will allow me to, I had that conversation with Leah, who's our regulator, last week. Talking about where does she see regulations headed in the next 10 years, what are the things that are hot topics for them? There's really two things that came out of that conversation that I think are worth noting. And one of them doesn't really pertain much to you guys. So the first one that I don't think is super main word, important for coastal communities is, they're worried about hazards. So with environmental kind of change, climate change, particularly coastal hazards is a big concern there. So I think, anything that we do here, they really want you to analyze what is the hazard to your system. And that's something that they'll want you to look at. So the good news is you guys aren't prone to flooding on this site. You're not prone to kind of coastal runoff. So you have a fairly low hazard site. You know, perhaps your biggest hazard here is wildland fires, so you would build it out of non-floodplain here. So that is one area that they've identified, but I don't think it's really impactful for you guys. The other one that I think, could be impactful or, you know, could wiggle its way on one of our permits is really recycled water. That's another big push of the state. The state has a policy to promote recycled water. The regional board, particularly our regional board, is really taking that to heart. So they're pushing very hard on recycled water. And the decision that was made previously in kind of the disease review, my opinion of this, building the MDR positions you very well for recycled water, gives you incredibly high effluent. So I noticed today, Scott, you said your turbidity coming out of the water treatment plant is 0.03 NTU. Most of the times I've looked at the water coming out of the Davis project that we just built, our MBR effluent is 0.01 NTU. So it's as clean as the water coming out of your water treatment plant in terms of turbidity. So I think it supports kind of the discussion that you had today around the MBR really for future-proof you as best as possible. And in my mind, we could even see that when we go in. So right now we're running on the time schedule, right? We've got this 5-year compliance period. When we're done building the new facilities, or if we head towards completion, we have to negotiate another permit with the regional board. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're pushing towards recycled water, even in that permit negotiation that we'll have here in 4.5 years.
Would we be able to add recycled water to alternative 2?
You can, so, yeah, you can, but you have to add additional treatment units, you have to add additional, it doesn't lend towards it as easily. So the nice thing about an MDR is it really gets you just have to disinfect it and you're there. Versus with like a BioVac retrofit process, you might have to do some additional steps depending on what your use was. You certainly would have to clarify it, or provide some additional kind of filtration.
Well, Doug, can you add that to your list? So we want to know what the package unit cost is to enlarge the package unit. I mean, we could just reach out to the manufacturer and find out what their unit cost is to add a recycled water unit to alternative 4, and then just a ballpark figure on what a recycled water unit would be to add to alternative 2.
And I guess we're passing there.
Right, that's great. Yeah, luckily, for us, there are lots of other, public agencies that are going through similar things right now, so I know some of the engineers that are working on those projects, and I can talk to them.
I was gonna clarify your regulator questions. Dylan talked about flows and recycled water, but were you meaning more of like constituents?
No, that'll be like what Dylan was saying. I think Dylan, that's pretty much what you have heard is coming down the pipes over the next 10 years, correct? Is that what you're saying you heard from the regulators?
I would recommend, and I'd be happy to sort of schedule a call between Scott, Doug, and Leah and I to talk about what do they see as the future of, the discharge permit for Heritage Ranch.
Yeah.
I had that discussion generically. I wasn't focused on Heritage Ranch.
Yeah, that'd be great. That way you can know what's coming up, at least,
Well, yeah,
gives you the whole a little bit.
well, because I would have the interest of, we don't really have a recycled water demand, like drivers, who we put it back into the lake.
Right. So even if they forced us to do it, we'd come up with some small little unit that would go onto the alternative 2, if that was the case. That's the only thing that we're looking over in the next 10 years is recycled water. We don't have the demand for it. Small little unit that's set off to the side that met regulations, but we'll find out when you guys talk to her and see what she has to say.
Right, well, yeah, so we have to have the capacity for it, but we might not use it, basically, but, yeah. Yeah, and just to put it back into the lake, we'd have to do more than just that. We'd have to go through our
yeah, reverse osmosis.
Alright.
So is that a consensus then, I hear, or we need to?
Yeah, you gotta think about that.
Yeah.
Got a month.
You go out and say, I should get.
Public comment?
Okay, so. Agenda here. Now, just to ask, are there any final comments or good discussion from anyone? First slide, so I guess not. Item E. Request to approve implementing the Western Road and Waterview Drive pressure reducing valve project, estimated cost of $175,000. And authorize the corresponding budget adjustment from reserves.
All right, thank you, Director Barker. This project is included in the 5-year CIP that your board approved. It was supposed to be scheduled in 2 or 3 years. It's not included in the current budget, therefore. But there's been some leaks in the areas of the PRVs, and we've just been thinking that to properly repair those leaks, it makes sense to do the project now instead of in 2 years or 3 years. So, that is the recommendation, and for any further discussion, I'll turn it over back to Doug if you want to talk about
I'll be brief.
the description of the project or anything, really quick.
Allegedly, yeah, I'll be brief. There are two, PRVs in question, one is up at the top of Equestrian, and one is on Waterview. And what our operations folks have told me is there's leaks, there's a vault that this PRV is pressure reducing valve, so water comes out of the tank or out of the pumps at a certain pressure, 110 PSI, let's say, and we want it, you know, you don't want it over 80 PSI for a resident. So we reduce the pressure and it helps us get flow throughout the district, lots of different things, but we take the pressure that we're getting from the tank and we reduce it at certain locations, two of which at Waterview, it goes into a vault so we can access this valve, and the pipe coming into the vault and going out of the vault is of sufficient age to where it's pretty corroded and it's apt to leakage. So when it leaks, we have to shut everything down, outage for the surrounding residents and fix the leak, and we've patched the leak here and there, but what we did the last time was we actually went beyond the vault and removed a section of the pipe and replaced it with new pipe. Well, at the upstream side of that valve on Waterview, we're gonna have the same problem very soon. And at Equestrian, it's the same thing with, we're not sure because of how much rain we've had, that there's water that is collecting in that area, and we're not sure if it's an early slight leak or if it's just groundwater, but we do know that the piping is corroded in the area, and that's, the operators asked if we could move this up.
We talk about the piping, is it the AC piping or do you have transition to steel piping?
It's ductile iron piping, yeah, and so, what this would do, we could put it in next year's budget, but I asked if we could add it, so that we could get going on it now, and the number that's on here, the 175,000, that's from the 5-year CIP that you approved or that the old board approved in August, but I wanna note that that is the absolute worst case. The reason why we need to do this project, or I wanna do it now because we have to go in there to replace this pipe, and it's more cost effective when we're going in there to replace the pipe to do this other work, because we're gonna have an outage, so we'll do that. It just makes sense. We don't know the extent of the cost because these PRVs need to be rebuilt. But we can't get into them because the isolation valves on either side of them don't work. So we need to replace those valves in order to get into the PRV to know the extent of the rebuild, or if we need to replace it altogether. So this 175 is if we brought in
outside contractors to do all the work, and we had to replace the PRVs themselves. We don't think we're gonna have to replace the PRVs. Clay Valve, just by looking at it, says you should be able to rebuild it. And the one on Equestrian, after we have a contractor install a new isolation valve on one side of it, we can actually perform that work ourselves and maintain service to all the residents in the area during that project, because we can backfeed it from the main gate. But without that isolation valve, we can't do it. So we have a contractor come and do the isolation valve at Equestrian, and then they do pretty much all the work at Waterview. But, we think we'll be able to just rebuild them, and so the cost should come in considerably less than this.
And then rebuild them on site, and rebuild them right there, and when we shut down Waterview, I know you can backfeed Equestrian, and can you backfeed Waterview too?
No, it would be, yeah, they come in and they rebuild it.
Right there.
Yeah, and the main thing is getting the isolation valves in, that's gonna be the one that would require the initial outage, and there's technology that you can, it's more expensive, but it reduces your outage time, it's called an inserter valve, and so we're trying to weigh the cost versus, the length of outage and things like that, so.
Well, if you're going to dig it up, that you should do as much as you can at that point to make that work.
I missed the first part.
So I agree with your perspective, that if you're gonna dig it up, you should do as much work as you can to spread that cost out.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do with everything is, kind of the economy of scale. We're working on something in the area and we can get something else done there. That's a big reason why I brought this a couple of years early.
But my thought is on this, rebuilding the valves is there, can they rebuild it as good as new? I mean, or is it just something that's gonna get it down the road 10 years? And instead of putting a brand new one in, I guess that's for 25 years.
Right, and we'll weigh that once they get in and look at it, like, we'll make sure they, the potential for them, they'll open it up and look at it and tell us what needs to be done and how long that should last. They can open it, look at it, put it back together without rebuilding it,
Okay,
once we have the isolation valve.
and there's a cost incurred with that too, okay?
Right, yeah, but they're gonna be the ones that we already have pricing actually on rebuilding it on what they assume they'll need to do, and it's not that bad. And like putting in the valves, if we went with the inserter valve, it depends on what the costs are, the ballpark pricing on that is, we're remote, so if you could do like $5,000 a valve or something like that would be, if we could get that would be great, and I might come back to you for a few other valves to put in at the time if we get that price.
So do you need a recommendation on this, or is this a
We would need a motion.
motion?
Hey, Bill, can I ask a question? This has been going on for many years, hasn't it? Cause I live almost next door to that box.
I don't know about many years, because I haven't been here many years, but I know it's been going on, that leaking has been going on for probably at least a year.
Along with that.
Yeah, that's all I've
And you're
been
talking
here
about
a year.
rebuilding those big, huge valves? That's in the wall?
In the vault, yeah. So there's a small valve and a big valve, one's like for normal flow, one's for higher flow. And then there's the isolation valves that are in there that don't function. So those would be replaced altogether. We're not gonna rebuild those.
Right.
And that's the big part of the work that requires the outage is replacing those.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Any public comment, other than Sam? Any further questions is anybody want to make a motion?
I move that we approve the movement of this funds to the general budget.
Staff, you can just say recommend approval of staff recommendation.
Recommend approval of staff recommendation.
Yes.
Roll call, Director Cap,
Yes.
Director Burgess,
Yes.
Director Barker.
Yes.
Director Kino,
Yes.
Director Young.
I personally like to see,
I agree with that, everything up here is so old, that I know you make a judgment call on it, but you're not judging something that's 10 or 15 years old, you're judging something that's 40 or 50 years old.
I don't judge.
Well, it just depends on the cost, so I don't like to
But a rebuild is a cost guess, you know,
Right.
I'm gonna rebuild it, I guess I'm gonna get this much more out of it, if I buy a new one, I know I'm gonna get this much.
Right.
It's all about dollars and cents, so for me, at that point, that juncture, that few dollar difference. I would prefer to buy something new, I mean, you make a call on it, but if you're.
Well, just depending on how much, we're talking 5,000 versus 50,000, I mean, $5,000,
Yeah, with the-
we want to rebuild.
Yeah, this is, we'll come back to you on it anyways, it's just, this allows,
Then you gotta weigh the risk.
Yeah, right. So I mean, if we're talking $1,000, then yeah, and we're talking versus rebuild, like, we're talking big bucks.
But
I'll
also,
bring it
you
back to you before.
gotta
we
watch
watch
10 years, what it's about, to rebuild it, but replace it in 10 years.
I believe the valve has been there since 1988.
Oh, really?
Yes. That's when that was built.
Our whole system is old.
That's when that was built.
Safety valve. You gotta go through that.
It's so, it's like similar ones to me that, a certain thing, that the valve is good for hundreds of years, and it just needs those rubber pieces and rebuild in there, or it's just like a motor from 1940 can be rebuilt, and that, these cores there.
Okay, moving on, we have, the item 7, future agenda items, determined by the majority of the board, upcoming future agenda items include reservoir report, water and sewer rate hearing, confirm standby charges, draft budget.
Sorry, we forgot number 6, is there any reports?
Oh, I thought.
Oral reports from the board?
I thought you might read it on. Anybody else have anything? About the public? They all spoke out?
Okay, so future agenda items. We have, I've been trying to list ones that are coming up. So the reservoir report will be next month, the rate hearing next month. Confirmed standby charges that we just talked about in 2 months in May. And then the draft budget will come up also.
Possibly the water contract, you said might be next month. Does that need to go on there?
Yeah.
And we were gonna talk about HR, we're gonna get another report from the attorney for the MOU.
Oh, no, I thought.
I'll provide an email with
Yeah.
the MOU and some information on that, and then if you want an item on there to ask questions about it, you can certainly. do that.
Yeah, I would like an item on there to discuss that, to find out what we're gonna do and how we're gonna, maybe, the idea of having a separate HR, or you know, talk about how the NRE set up different directory.
On the other board, we use an outside firm that does our HR for us. They're there, and I don't think we actually pay them until we use them.
That's great, so that would be great, so we can have that discussion at the next meeting, if we could, please.
And one other thing we might want to consider doing, if the board's interested in exploring changes on that, is to give some direction to the personnel committee. To look at the MOU and some of the other options, and then that way you can go a little farther down the road, the designated committee. Great, that's something that's of interest.
Thank comment, do we have any committee meetings? Unless,
They're only scheduled as an as-needed basis, so there'll be one coming up for the finance committee to talk about the budget.
but we haven't had any in the last, okay.
And by the way, just for your information, I'm on all committees according to the record and how it's set up. So we can get that.
Usually.
Okay, seeing that, I guess we're gonna go to closed session,
We'll make a motion to adjourn.
to closed session.
We usually do public comment though first on that.
Is there any public comment, closed session?
Yeah, thanks, Director Johnson.
Close the future agenda.
Not seeing,
I think I made my comments earlier, but just, to reiterate, we're treated to read my stuff. And let's try to move this along, please.
do we have a motion to adjourn to closed session, is there a second? No second.
No, it's that. Thank you. All in favor?
And it made it look like an owl, when you said it was an owl, I didn't look at it look like an owl.
It actually looks like.
Looks like an owl. Makes sense that it's called the owl.
Well, it's odd,
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. President, we're coming out of, closed session now with no reportable action.
Okay, don't get to open the meeting.
Now we're on number 10. For you. Which is adjourn now.
That's right, sorry. I moved to adjourn.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I make that motion.
Second.
No, I guess.
All in favor?
Aye.
Don't be 7 o'clock.